Good evening, everyone.
Madam Mayor, just by way of recap, for those who didn't have the pleasure of attending last night's public hearing, at the July 15, 2019 regular meeting, Council passed a resolution to adjourn the regular meeting to tonight, July 16, 2019 at 6 p.m. in the Council chamber, which is why we're all here on a Tuesday. And Madam Mayor, just for members of the public's benefit, staff worked this morning to try and resolve the tech issues. They were resolved, and when we all sat down about half an hour ago, they seemed to no longer be resolved. So we do not have use of the document camera still or the projectors. So staff presentations will still project, but we don't have the document camera or the agenda on the overhead. We apologize. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding this meeting on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and Musqueam Nation. We recognize and respect them as nations in this territory, as well as their historic connection to the lands and waters around us since time immemorial. So does Council have any urgent business to add to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for a recommendation to approve the agenda. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Recommend that the reconvened July 15th, 2019 regular council meeting agenda be amended by adding to item 3 the minutes of the July 8th, 2019 public hearing and regular council meetings and the July 8th, 2019 public hearing summary report, and by adding item 3.1 regarding West Vancouver Memorial Library 2018 Annual Community Report, and by withdrawing item 8 regarding the proposed Heritage Revitalization Agreement bylaw number 5026-2019 and Heritage Designation bylaw number 5027-2019 for 3321 Radcliffe Avenue, the Hewitt House, and by adding item 12.3 regarding resolution for 2019 UBCM conference regulating single-use items, and that the agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
Great, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And the adoption of the minutes.
Thank you. I'll recommend that the minutes of June 24th, 2019 special open session and regular council meetings and public hearings at the June 26th, 2019 special open session council meeting be adopted as circulated.
Okay.
Pardon?
Oh, sorry.
And that the summary of the June 24th, 2019 public hearing regarding proposed zoning bylaw 4662-2010, amendment bylaw number 5021-2019 for 2330 Cypress Bowl Lane and 2850 Wentworth Avenue, Mulgrave School, be approved, and that the minutes of July 8th, 2019 public hearing and regular council meeting be adopted as circulated, and the summary of July 8th, 2019 public hearing regarding the proposed official community plan bylaw number 4985-2018, amended bylaw number 5008-2019, and proposed zoning bylaw number 4662-2010, amended bylaw number 5009-2019, 727 Keith Road, Amica, Lionsgate, be approved.
Second.
Right, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. I'd like to remind the public that if you wish to speak to an agenda item for 3 minutes maximum, please sign the speakers list, speak clearly into the microphone so that everyone can hear comments, including those who depend on assisted listening devices, and provide your name and whether you are a West Vancouver resident if you wish to do so. So we'll move on to reports. First item, West Vancouver Memorial Library 2018 Annual Community Report. Can I get Councillor Lambert to make that motion?
Oh, I didn't realize it was deferred. Okay. Madam Mayor, recommend that the presentation regarding West Vancouver Memorial Library 2018 Annual Community Report be deferred.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. So the next item is the proposed amendment to the interim tree bylaw. And before we move to, we're not going to have a staff presentation on this tonight. And since the last meeting, it's the inclination of council to actually defer 4 out of 5 of the recommendations until we actually get some data around the tree canopy through the LiDAR process and the comparison process. I noticed that we have 11 speakers signed up. My recommendation would be that the speakers come back when we actually are debating specific terms of the bylaw and have some actual data to rely on. But I am, if there are speakers that want to speak, I am prepared to hear them at this point. But right now, the council is looking at deferring all but the LiDAR motion. So on that basis, is there anyone that would wish to speak?
I'm not on the list. It's David Ranch.
Oh, you're not even on the
I'm
list.
not on the list. I just wanted to ask the question, so what's going to be in place? Is it the interim tree bylaw still will be in place?
That's correct.
Okay, as intact as now?
Yes,
Are there any
as
changes
in
to it? Okay.
the unamended
The one that's
interim.
been in place for the last 3 years?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. And if you'd like to speak, come up if you've signed up, or if you've not signed up, just let me know your name and whether you're a West. Yes.
Councillors. My name is Franz Geriger. I live on 1114 Hillside Road, and I reviewed the amended bylaws, and as you know, there was an interim working group, tree bylaw working group, working very hard under the leadership of Mr. Bishop. And there were clearly 4 recommendations. One recommendation from the staff was taken out with obviously reasons. I heard that the overall staff said it would not be in the best interest and would take things away like the environment of West Vancouver. That's hedges. Hedges are finally somewhere included and defined in this recommendation. It says 4 or more trees or shrubs which form a line along the property lines should not exceed 3 meters. Madam Chair, if you look today in West Vancouver, it's close to criminal what hedges are. Hedges are going out on the sidewalk. They are growing that you can't stop anymore, that you don't see. And on the end of Hillside, I would like to invite you to look at this. These are hedges which are just overgrowing. You don't see any house, you don't see the entrance anymore. And I think something has to be done, and this should be included in the staff report, hedges. And I think this was a reflection of the citizens in Vancouver, of the residents, which recommended. And Mr. Bishop did a tremendous good job, and I don't understand that based on just feelings that the staff excluded it. I recommend to include it as well.
Thank you very much. Maybe I should go through the list as in order, and then if it, well, okay, I'll let you speak. Your
My name is Hans Crutzen. I'm a resident of Cedardale. I just want you to clarify, what did you say about Taylor Wood? That we're not going to speak tonight?
Sorry, we haven't got to that matter yet. We're just talking about the tree bylaw first. That item is item number 5.
But you made a reference to Taylor.
No,
You didn't? I'm sorry,
I
I
don't believe
misunderstood.
I did.
Okay.
I didn't.
Excuse me, Mayor. Alison Cody couldn't be here this evening. She's asked me to do, pardon? Oh, Therese, right. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Alison Commode asked me to speak on her behalf this evening because she wasn't available to come. She had prepared notes for last night. So perhaps I should let her deliver her own notes. Would that be better then? So you could tell me when this might be happening. Are we waiting now for 6 months, or what are we doing?
The motion anticipate, yes, approximately that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
So, my name is Lan. I'm the resident of Prestige Property. So last time there's a discussion about the hash. So and then after that, because the staff tried to exclude it, so I don't know what is the conclusion about the hash. So I read the staff report, and the hash issue is a real concern and real conflict between neighbors. That's why there's a survey in the past 2 years by Tree Working Group, to bring the hash issue under suggestion for 15 feet. I would like to bring 6 points for the hash. West Vancouver neighborhood character. Thornhead is not neighborhood character 20, 40 years ago because there is no regulation. That's why hash keep growing up. And like cedar, western red cedar tree, with the rate of 3 feet per year, it can go up to 30 feet in 10 years. So neighborhood character 20, 40 years ago is not that high hash. Second question about privacy protection. Please understand that as long as the hash go up to the roof of the house, privacy is protected. It doesn't have to be, 100 feet. Point number 3, huge different lot size in West Vancouver. My house is 1/3 lot size compared with my neighbor house. So the neighbor draw 25 feet high hash. So it's constant spreading out and it's encroached to my garden. I bought the electric trimmer to trim the side, only the side of the hash. But it's too tall for me to manage it. So that's why the upper section of the hash still cover the sun. So I cannot grow vegetable. And the problem is, the neighbor is an empty house. So nobody live there for privacy protection. Number 4, the concern about trimming down the hash, you kill the mature head. I think hash will not be killed if there's still a lot of green and the root is not disturbed. And 15 feet high cannot kill the hash if it's trimmed down. Number 5, the concern about 60 staff resource to deal with new hash regulation. This is a private property by law. It's not and Curriculum 60 has a bylaw about tree joining the property. They clearly specify that tree between property, the city will not involve. It's made for the property owner. Sorry, I have one more point, please. One more point.
Just wrap up quickly,
Yeah,
though.
okay. So the city curriculum has a bylaw clearly specify city will not involve in the agreement between the neighbor. So please understand that, we live in West Van, we need sharing. As long as the privacy protection, please give the neighbors some enjoyment for
Thank you.
sun and view. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Rainer?
Rainer Fassler. I obviously have to improvise because I was going to speak in relationship to the amendment, but I have to say I'm actually really discouraged that we leave the 75 centimeter diameter protection in place. Given that you have declared a climate crisis the other day, I think it's scandalous what we're doing. We are actually risking, during that period, an incredible number of trees. I went to the trouble and actually surveyed 4 blocks in Ambleside. And it's interesting that of the 4 blocks with 66 trees, we actually only have 4 or 5 mature trees that actually are 75 centimeters. All the rest of the trees are basically subject to cutting. And since it's obvious that once we have the LiDAR test, that we have a much more strict bylaw, I think we're putting these trees at risk because it's only logical that property owners and most of all developers will take advantage of that period and cut. I mean, I was really impressed at that time, what was it, the 8th of July, when a young man said, you know, the fight against climate change consists of many small steps. And I was going to say, this is a really small and easy step that we could take. I was encouraged last time when you lowered the limit down to 35, which isn't even Vancouver. I think it is actually scandalous that we make a declaration like this, have these eloquent words, and then we bail on the issue and say, let's leave the 75 centimeter for 1 or 2 years and put all those trees at risk. I am really shocked, I have to say that. Really disappointed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes? Nick?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nick Tsangarakis, and I live on 17th Street, and I am the chair of the interim tree working group that was in place until 6 months ago. First thing I'd like to say is I do think we need to understand the logic for the decision that you've just made. And I think it's the right thing to do. It's one thing to have made the decision that ostensibly you made this afternoon. But
Sorry, Nick, I'll just interrupt. So
Right.
just to be clear, I said use the term inclination on purpose because we do have to debate it. The decision hasn't been made, but I wanted to put the group on notice of where we were leaning in case they were going to speak to the amendment in any great length. So we are still going to be debating the motions, but that is the inclination at this point. So we have not made a decision, but I wanted to put the group on notice around where we were leading.
okay. I then
I'm
would-
sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. I would then just remind you that what we learned as a result of our extensive consultation from residents is that there is a desire to maintain the current tree canopy. What we've learned is that our community does not necessarily want to see more trees, but they certainly don't want to see any more trees lost. So this is a key outcome from the work that we did and the key objective that I would ask you to keep in the forefront. And any delay by way of regulation in this regard is counter to this objective. So I think there is a sense of urgency. I think regulation or some form of protection for trees is required. And I think it's a wrong decision to wait for further tree canopy research to be done. I think we do need an interim step, and I would urge you to make decisions accordingly.
Thank you. And thanks for your work again on that working group. Anyone else? Mary?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I feel I have to speak too. I was going to speak to the amended bylaw, but in this situation, I still think I have to speak, and I do concur with Nick and Rainer regarding climate crisis, that I think that should put a new lens on our thoughts about the tree bylaw. I am still going to say I would like to make 2 recommendations to enhance the amended bylaw. I would think that the diameter of a protected tree should be reduced to 20 centimetres. That's in line with 8 other municipalities. And why? Because it is essential to protect both young and old trees. In the working group, of which I was a member, education was a key component. We said education was most important in establishing a successful bylaw, and education is most important for the residents to know how, with good pruning, good maintenance, they can protect trees. They don't all have to come down. Every time you take a tree down, even if you replace it, you do lose the ecological services of that tree. No replacement tree will replace the existing tree. So I feel like, Nick, we cannot wait 6 months to make an amendment, that we should do something simple now. Something simple now might be just, say, 20 centimetres in diameter, and that would immediately protect more trees. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Carol Ann Reynolds?
Thank you very much. I agree with everything that the former chair said, Mr. Nick Tsangarakis. If you can only pass, I'm actually, I can
Sorry,
wait. I can wait.
Councillor Lambert.
I can wait, no problem.
Thank you.
I think we would benefit if you could repeat what you're suggesting doing, because it wasn't quite clear to me. As I understand it, you're going to approve part of what it is and not all of it. So because what I was going to say is that to at least pass the 0.35 reduction. I mean, I agree with the previous speaker that it should be 0.20, but if you don't want to spend time, at least that first step would be a big help. And I would like to clarify, when talking about canopy, no one can possibly say that we haven't lost some of the tree canopy. But if you're going to at least try to keep it, that would be a first step as well, and then wait for the things. So if you aren't going to discuss all of these things, as I said, the things I would like you to pass is the reduction in DBH, whatever you decide, whether it's 0.35, what's in it, or whatever. Secondly, I'm very, very concerned about someone being able to remove a tree every year or every 3 years. I mean, that's just seems ridiculous to me, because, I mean, what we want to do is encourage trees, not to reduce them. On the other hand, I don't have any problem with someone who has a property trying to decide what to have on their property, which is why all along, many years now, I've promoted that we have a hydrology study, because we can't decide what trees or vegetation you're going to be on your property, but you do have a responsibility to your neighbors to have enough plants or kinds of plants to at least retain maybe about 75% of the moisture that it originally had, so that we are preventing erosion and flooding. So we can't dictate what you put there, but we have to dictate, it's your responsibility, resulting in science, that you protect the hillside and your neighbors. So if you're not going to pass it all, I hope that you could pass the minimum, being that it's to 0.35, and that, you know, whatever else is easy and is least. So I compliment you from trying to go forward with this. We've been waiting for it for a long time. So the reduction in the size and the reduction in our loss would be good. And that helps. Those people with climate change problems, having trees really helps.
Thank you. And I was actually going to invite you back up, because
Thank you
it's,
very
in
much.
fairness.
I misunderstood inclination.
No,
here.
it's no problem. And my full list includes the Taylor Wood, so
All right.
I'm happy that you came forward.
Speaking for Alison Commode, the existing science behind preserving trees as a means to mitigate climate change and its multitude of downstream consequences is immense and irrefutable. What we need tonight is true leadership and real hardcore strategies. You have now declared a climate emergency, and I thank you for putting financial backing to this so that projects to address ecosystems, services, and climate change mitigation can be supported. As part of this, you can start tonight by nixing the amended tree bylaws and replacing them with much stricter tree protection, because what is presently on the table is not supported by science, will not yield a sustainable tree cover, and does not come anywhere near representing stewardship. In the meantime, there should be a moratorium placed on tree cutting, as this may serve as motivation to finally adequately address this issue after a lapse of 12 years since tree bylaws were first considered in 2008. A keystone species is partly defined as one that is of central importance to a given ecosystem, that if removed, the entire ecosystem collapses. With that definition, trees, especially conifer species, and angiosperms as well, can be thought of as being super keystone species, as they are central to the health of multiple terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. To not impose the highest protection to this most important group of organisms that provide the basis for the health of a planet represents a colossal hypocrisy. We as a community, especially for our youth and upcoming generations, cannot afford to have you talk out of both sides of your mouth. You have declared a climate emergency, therefore you can start tonight by acting accordingly. Because as stated by the North Shore News, the political blowback that you may face today is nothing compared to the strife that future generations will face as the winds of change grow ever stronger. This is no exaggeration. The 25 or so youth that presented to Council over the past 2 to 3 months about climate change, the value of trees, and so on, did so very intelligently and passionately. They also demonstrated leadership, critical thinking, and in some cases, innovation. That is what we need from you, and you need to support our youth. I note that some of the youth are still waiting for your responses. West Vancouver is a true jewel. We have all the gifts of nature here, but we need to build our community and our environment ethic. I would argue that if we start tonight with you realizing the need for the vital stricter tree bylaws and strategies toward protection of trees, and begin activities toward restoration and maintenance and management, we may begin to change what I call the me community to a we community. I'll skip to the end here. I'll leave this with you. Your actions and policy recommendations need to be based on existing science, sustainability, and stewardship. The latter, stewardship, means that we need to give up things so that we can ensure that future generations will flourish. Our climate crisis requires all of us to think and act fundamentally different. There is no downside to having greater tree protection. What Council is presently recommended is simply not going to continue the status quo. It's not thinking and acting. The stricter bylaws I suggest in my letter of July the 12th are 20 centimeters DBH. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Any other speakers? I think we've got everyone that was on the list. Oh, I'm sorry. Marjorie, yes, Somerton.
Hello, my name is Marjorie Somerton, and I would like to start by saying, first they came for the Douglas firs, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Douglas fir. Then they came for the Western red cedars, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Western red cedar. Then they came for the yews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a yew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me, an ordinary tree. As a longtime West Vancouver resident, I was going to commend the working group staff and council on all their work on the tree bylaw, but I must say that I am so disappointed that you are deferring another important decision again for another 6 months. We don't have that kind of time to wait. I keep thinking, how do so many other municipalities get it right and West Van keeps getting it wrong? In respect to planting newer replacement trees, it's vital. We all need to do it. But according to the climate change clock, we have about 10 years to make a difference. And planting a seedling today will not replace the environmental benefits of mature trees that still need to be protected and will continue to come down. I would ask that council at least add the recommendations about the endangered species that were going to be added to the proposed amended tree bylaw be added to the current interim bylaw. That's not too hard. I also just wanted to say that I thought the price for permit in the proposed amendment was too high, $300. Money doesn't grow on trees. Currently, it's about $100. And many people are concerned about forest fires. West Van has had numerous major fires going back to the 1800s. I like to think that fire protection is a lot better now, but it's the dead western red cedars that are turning brown and dying on public lands that also concerns me. I spotted 5 in a neighborhood park just this past weekend, and these huge dead cedars are more of a lightning rod for a forest fire than any mature, healthy tree. And finally, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone here? Well, everyone in West Van will, because the chainsaws are revving up now, and it's not pretty. Just go for a stroll down 31st Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other speakers on this item? All right, so I would ask that the motion get put on the floor from Councillor, oh, it's from me, from Mayor Booth. All righty. I'll make the motion that staff, and I'm making the motion because I was the liaison to the working group, and I do have some comments around this. So I will move that that staff be directed to include funding in the 2019 fall budget amendments to obtain 2013 LiDAR data to enable a baseline comparison with 2018 data currently in process. All right, and so I'll start with my remarks on this item. First of all, I'd like to kind of regroup and take us back in time, because this journey did start back in 2016 when council observed and the community observed a change in the community. There was a lot of development going on, especially in Ambleside and Dunderave. There was a lot of what we'd call clear cutting of the lots and trees coming down, mature trees coming down. So that is what initiated the discussion and the original interim bylaw. Subsequent to that, as you all know, we formed a working group in 2017 made up of 9 or 10 residents from a diverse perspective with a very complementary set of skill sets, and they were a very hardworking group. They met for 15 months. I was the liaison, and I think I only missed one meeting in that time, and so I saw the process. And it wasn't an easy process. As you're all aware, there's a few issues in West Vancouver that have caused division in the community, and trees are one of them. And this process that they undertook was very comprehensive. And I was reviewing, at the recommendation of one of my members, I was reviewing the final report of that working group. It took them 15 months, but they underwent a very comprehensive analysis. And this was, I want to reiterate what that was. They did a survey conducted in the fall of 2017. They held public meetings in November and April of 2018. They analyzed every single letter that came into council between 2017 and 2018. They analyzed previous information that had come into council in 2008 and 2016, before the group was even formed, related to tree management and letters to council. They met with council and staff, and in all, they considered and were guided by more than 1,200 West Vancouver residents. And the data analyzed, and we had, quite honestly, a specialist in data analysis, and he analyzed all this data, and it indicated broad community support for a tree management bylaw. The concerns expressed most often were regarding maintaining existing views, removal of mature trees and other vegetation from lots under development, safety issues regarding large trees damaging property, appropriate pruning and maintenance, and the amount of bureaucracy that a new bylaw may incur on residents and district staff. And they acknowledged the OCP language that we all agreed to in our official community plan, which was balanced tree retention, replacement, or compensation for their ecological value with consideration to access to sunlight and significant public views. The group, as you know, looked at best practices from a number of municipalities. In fact, every single municipality in Metro was looked at, as well as municipalities outside of Metro, including Courtenay, including Carmel, and all of that was considered. And they debated three options: maintaining the existing bylaw of 75 centimeters, developing a bylaw that would apply to all private residential properties, requiring a minimum number of trees per lot based on lot size, and developing a bylaw that would apply only to private residential lots being developed or redeveloped, requiring a minimum number of trees per lot based on lot size. They ended up going with the second option, which is the bylaw would apply to everyone. So it's important for people that are here and the community in general to understand the process that was involved. And so they came up with 19 recommendations, 11 formed the basis, which was around this idea of minimum number of trees per lot. They came up with 11 of those that established regulations to maintain existing tree canopy, conduct a survey of tree canopy, which is one of the recommendations that we're supporting, establish regulations to control hedge heights. Those were three sort of the core principles. Then they also had supporting recommendations that related to creating an urban forest management plan. And finally, they had educational recommendations. And there were 4 groups in each of those, totaling 19 recommendations. That was submitted, and I won't get my dates completely correct, but 15 months later. That's from spring of 2017. So took us into the end of 2018. Staff then took several months to look at how these recommendations could be implemented. And staff went through an entire process with the Tree Bylaw Working Group, with many departments, to evaluate whether this could be implemented, the costs associated, and a number of other factors which formed the basis of the recommendations to council, which, while they retained many of the recommendations of the working group, the fundamental one around minimum number of trees per lot and replacing those was not adopted. So where we are today, and the reason that I'm supporting this recommendation and not necessarily the others, nor the amendments that were introduced at the May 27th meeting, is that, well, for one thing, I do feel the amendments not only didn't really consider the working group findings, they didn't consider they changed the staff recommendations. There was no data or analysis presented. In fact, they were presented at the meeting as is, based on, yes, I'll say some other precedents in other communities, but not based on, and this was and I voted for it, and I voted for it because of the flexibility that was offered, as well as, in addition to, I should say, the change to the minimum tree size. I voted for it because I thought, well, I had been on the working group for 15 months, and I knew that the community was interested in flexibility. And I also understood and had observed that through that process, and I was quoted in the paper on this, that for the most part, and I don't think anyone can disagree with this, for the most part, the community the majority of the community were doing the right thing. There were a number of development proposals that really were egregious. And I felt like we were kind of punishing or limiting the majority because of actions of a few. So, but I voted for the motion. I was a deciding vote, and I percolated on it for the last 6 weeks. And I really felt like this isn't based on any data, the numbers. In fact, both elements of the amendments weren't based on any data or science. It was a compromise, my understanding, of sort of picking one number and another number and sawing it off in the middle. And that's, in my mind, that is not good governance. And then even the component that dealt with flexibility really was also, in my mind, kind of arbitrary. It was, oh, well, we'll allow Ambleside and Dunderave residents to cut one tree every 3 years, but we're going to say the rest of West Vancouver can cut down one every year, and we'll allow a reasonable number for the multifamily properties. And I don't want my council colleagues to take me as being critical of what they did, because I'm not being critical. I'm actually explaining why I've now moved from that. There's a number of obviously council were in agreement with this process earlier, and it's their opportunity now to make their submissions. But to continue, that's the core of why I think we need the LiDAR. We need the comparison. We can get the comparison to the 2013 data, and then we can actually see what our tree canopy is. How does that compare to best practices? Is it 25%? Is it 50%? I have no idea. I do know that other jurisdictions like Seattle and Melbourne, they actually measure it and then track it and then have goals and targets based on that. So I think that's important. The other thing is, this amendment, unfortunately, the community has been following the interim bylaw and the work of the working group. And now we have an amendment which really has not been out in the community, in my mind, long enough for people to be aware of this. This is a significant issue, and I think we need an opportunity for the community to know where we're going and bring the community along. The other thing is, this is going to require an additional, or at least the original staff recommendation was going to require an additional 2 full-time staff to administer this bylaw. And that's significant. Adding 2 full-time staff to administer this bylaw is significant. And as I read out to you, one of the concerns of the community was that we not create a big bureaucracy for this. So that I take into account. Finally, I do think that, going back to the LiDAR analysis, that if we are going to set targets, we need more precise data around neighborhoods. And we did hear this as well during this 15-month process, that what's good for Ambleside Dunderave may not be appropriate for out west. So I really want to know precisely what we're dealing with. I think we can do that in a reasonable amount of time, and so that's why I'm supporting deferral of the other recommendations and supporting the LiDAR to get some actual science and data behind our decision. Thank you, and sorry, I appreciate everyone listening, and I know I took a fair amount of time, but given my unique perspective on the working group, I felt I had to respect their work and acknowledge their work and share that. So Seconder was Marcus.
Thank you, Your Worship. So certainly I'll speak to this motion that's currently on the table. I certainly believe that having data with respect to our tree canopy is very useful in terms of determining what sort of tree diameter is the right number. You know, certainly pulling a number from thin air, as it were, I'm uncomfortable with that. And so certainly I think this will provide us with the information that we need about all of the parts of West Vancouver, from east to west, north to south. So there we go.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Soprovich.
Well, thank you for that. That's very detailed. I know there's been a tremendous amount of work. I wanted to ask Ms. McGuire a question. May I? In the report, it states that we need data from a LIDAR method, which would enable a baseline comparison to 2018. Why is it a necessity to drop from 35 centimeters or higher as a prerequisite to it'll come out in a minute, to this, making way for this? I mean, you know, you got a 35 centimeter tree, it sits there, people know that they can't cut it down for 6 months. Why are we not keeping that? It's ridiculous to go backward. Recommendation to working group, they know what's going on. I just can't understand why we would make that statement and then to say, well, there's not enough data to support 35 centimeters. It's common sense.
Councillor Soprovich, so staff, actually, their recommendation was 75 centimeters. It was the amendment that was 35 centimeters.
I know.
And that is for discussion tonight.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, the amendment.
So I don't know if Ms. McGuire really can respond to that.
Well, Madam Mayor, just to be clear, and through the mayor to Councillor Soprovich, the recommendation that staff are recommending was in direct response to council's motion on May the 27th, where you directed us to a number of things, but to protect existing trees over 75 centimeters DBH. So that was council that directed us. We went away, and Michelle very diligently in about 6 weeks turned around the report. We worked with finance to come up with the FTE equivalency, all that sort of thing, and we're back in front of you. So that's what staff's recommendation is. So just to be clear.
Well, I think this, if I'm reading it correctly, the only recommendation is to wait for the LIDAR data. There is no consideration to maintain a 35 centimeter tree.
So, Madam Mayor, just to be clear again, that's what staff are recommending. What's on the floor is something that council has put forward.
Well, can we make an amendment to keep the 35 centimeter tree?
You certainly can.
That is what the other motions deal with the bylaw that was presented by staff in response to the last meeting's motions.
I'm supporting your motion tonight there.
Okay.
And where is this amendment coming from then? I'd like to make it.
Point of order, ma'am, I believe we've actually already voted on that bylaw, correct?
No.
No, when you made the motion.
That's what's actually on table tonight.
So,
Right now, we're talking about
the LIDAR.
survey only,
Right.
so this is not the place to make that amendment, Councillor Soprovich. This is just about whether we do a LIDAR.
Well, what time of evening are we going to do that?
Then right after we pass this.
Okay, well, I'm game for that.
All right. Councillor Lambert.
Well, I certainly support the recommendation to include funding for the additional LIDAR data. And I don't know, should we just call the question on that and then continue? So, because I have comments beyond that.
All right.
Did you?
You're okay? You're not? I'm fine. Okay. So I will call the question on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. So the second recommendation that I'm going to make is that consideration of proposed interim tree bylaw number 4892, 2016, amendment number bylaw number 5023, 2019, proposed bylaw notice enforcement bylaw number 4368, 2004, amendment bylaw number 5032, 2019, and proposed municipal ticket information system implementation bylaw number 4383, 2004, amendment bylaw number 5033, 2019, and the inclusion of 2 additional full-time equivalent positions in the budget be deferred until such time that staff have completed the baseline comparison between the 2013 and 2018 LiDAR data. Can I get a seconder for that?
Well, second.
Okay.
And so when can I do a motion to include the 35-centimeter tree or larger during the 6-month period? Because when the data comes in, I suspect, Mr. Bailey and Ms. McGuire, that there's going to be change made, but we have a 6-month protection period where people be well advised that they are not to touch anything over 35 centimeters. If it remains at 75, good luck.
So, Madam Mayor, just from a process perspective, I think if Councillor Soprovich wants to move that, he likely shouldn't second the motion that the mayor put on the floor.
Do I have a seconder?
It's my motion, so do I
Oh,
have a
sorry.
second? Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. So I don't have a lot to add to what I said at the beginning, and I think you understand where I'm coming from. I don't believe in kind of pulling things out of the air at the last minute. That's not, and out of respect for the working group. I really feel that my hope is actually also in the preceding months that we can review some of the recommendations of the working group to determine if these are, there's any hope that that they're implementable, that we can find a way to incorporate more of the working group recommendations than we have. Okay, Councillor Lambert.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, what I'm looking for, and I think what we're talking about here, and a number of the speakers referred to, is maintaining the existing tree canopy. And the proposed amendments to the interim bylaw, which staff have formulated today, works towards that goal. Now, I think the important thing to know or to understand is the proposed amendment is to the interim bylaw. This isn't the final word. It's a kind of a stopgap. It's a protection measure. It is not based on science, except to the extent that one can refer to other jurisdictions where a certain size, 35 centimeter or less, has been put in place. I look at it as being good for 6 months and protecting trees that are 35 centimeters DBH or better. Now, one of the issues that staff correctly pointed out with the amendments that was proposed in May was the inclusion of allowances for tree cutting, 1 per every year in the greater area and 1 per 3 years in the Ambleside Dunderave area, and that with that provision and the smaller tree size, there is the risk of losing a lot of trees that we wouldn't have if we just would have maintained the 75 centimeter mark. Now, the way to deal with that is to remove that particular provision from the amendment, which is Article 6.6, and just keep it simply as the 35 centimeter limit. As to the related issues of staff funding, so that would require an amendment to the amendment, but just a small one. And otherwise, I would keep the existing or the proposed amendment intact. And in terms of the issue, the considerable issue of staff requirements, I would change the wording to consider funding in the fall budget and to monitor the activity and how much we may actually need to deal with the consequences of this amended interim bylaw in this short period of time while we're waiting to see results out of the LiDAR survey. So that's what I would propose, and I can't support the motion that's currently on the floor to defer all of those items.
Can I just get a clarification from Mr. Bailey or Mr. Panneton? We now have a drafted bylaw and a motion or we don't have actually a motion, but from Councillor Lambert is proposing to amend the interim tree, the new bylaw. And is that possible, given the resolutions we have before us? Or does staff have to go back and redraft it?
So, Madam Mayor, right now, the motion that's on the floor is to defer the 3 bylaws. If council chooses to defeat the deferral motion, then they can pass a motion to direct staff to make whatever modifications they'd like to any of those 3 bylaws, and then staff will likely have to go away. I mean, it depends on how extensive those modifications are, but presumably staff would need some time to make whatever modifications that council is directing staff to make to those bylaws.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ask you.
Yeah, Councillor Sopwith.
Is there an appetite on council to at least look at the serious side of maintaining a 35 centimeter or greater position on trees until the 6 months are up?
Well,
I'd love to speak to the deferral,
yes.
Madam Mayor, but
Yeah.
I'd like to get more from you.
Oh, I didn't do that, I
No.
promise.
I think I used up my words last night.
Madam Mayor.
Come over here.
There.
Sit over here.
I'm gonna go to Nora's seat.
Yeah. So
So-
if I say Councillor Gambioli, you know that I'm speaking to you because I'm looking at my screen. All right, so.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Sorry, just for council's information, it seems as though not only do we have the tech problems of yesterday, we have worse
ones?
tech problems.
Oh.
So right now, council can only queue 1 microphone at a time, and we can only have 1 mic apart from yours open at this time. So if we can just resort to raising hands when they want to speak. Thank you.
So should I move back and we can just turn Bill off and turn me on? Okay. I'm gonna channel my inner Soprovich there for a moment. We can always turn me on that side. There we go. So, this is, I think we have to go back just a little bit here and give us a bit of context. So I agree that there's been obviously decades of discussion on the tree issue in West Vancouver that predates my time on council by a long time, and yet we never really did anything until we brought the tree bylaw in, the interim tree bylaw. The working group did a really comprehensive process for 15 months, and they surveyed the community, and they came up with their recommendations. Staff looked at the issue a great deal carefully and looked at the practical implications and the costs of actually implementing what the working group was doing, and they came up with a different set of recommendations. Both staff's work and the working group's work, I think, are wonderful. Sorry, I won't say wonderful, but they're very, very good. They're good work. They put a lot of time in. I don't take any issue with their process or their integrity or their skill. But at the end of the day, we have to make our decisions. You know, we don't, I'm not ceding my chair to either staff or to the working group. I have to make my own decisions based on what, we all have to make our own decisions, I think, on council, based on what we think is correct. And so what happened at the last meeting when this was discussed is actually staff's recommendation wasn't even seconded. So then that was dead. And nobody moved the working group's recommendation. And the reason I didn't move the working group's recommendation, the reason staffs didn't support it, is because it had no teeth. It would have allowed a clear cutting of a property as long as somebody planted 6 tiny saplings back, which is not maintaining the tree canopy, which I think we all agree is the overall objective, is maintaining or adding to the tree canopy while not overly interfering with people's lives or over bureaucratizing it, the situation. So that's the balance that I'm trying to achieve, and it's not an easy balance. So at that meeting, faced with nothing, I did my best to try to put forward what I thought was something that introduced more protection but also flexibility by moving the tree protection down to 35 centimeters. And one can deride that as arbitrary, but so is 75 centimeters. Really, so is any size of centimeters. It's somewhat arbitrary. We pick a level, and then we stick to that. You know, and I don't. Not that anybody was particularly criticizing, but I just offer those people who say that 35 centimeters is arbitrary, I offer them the opportunity to come up with a number that they think in its stead, because it's easy to lobby fruit from the outside, but it's harder to come up with the actual position. So 35 centimeters, I don't think, I'm not going to sit here and defend that it's the only position or that it's the most defensible position or whatever, but it's what I wanted to do to protect some of the larger trees that weren't 75 centimeters. And introducing the notion of allowing some tree cutting is to try to introduce some flexibility for reasonable people to maintain their properties. And again, saying 1 per year in the rest of the municipality and 1 every 3 years in Ambleside, Dunderave is just a reaction to the reality. We all know that the tree canopy is less in Ambleside and Dunderave, and that some of the other neighborhoods have entire lots full of trees, so may need to have a little bit more maintenance. My own personal view is that trees, I'd like to see more protection. I'm concerned about preserving the tree canopy, and I do take very seriously the notion that we're in a climate emergency. But at the same time, we have to make due diligence and act on the basis of sound information. You know, I respect the working group, but I'm more concerned about the tree canopy. And so the question is in the next, you know, I do appreciate that we should have the LiDAR data. It would give us more of a information with which to make choices about which neighborhoods had different regulations or treatment of trees, and about what's happening to the tree canopy. My own perception is in the last couple of years it's stayed relatively constant, but I don't know if that's just anecdotal. So more information would be good. We're going to get that more information and make it up 4 to 6 months. Well, what are we going to do in the interim? And I guess there's 2 choices. We can stick with the interim tree bylaw, which is 75 centimeters, or we can move to something like Councillor Lambert's suggesting, which is move that, or Councillor Soprovich, which is move that number down to 35 centimeters for the next 6 months. I personally would prefer to, you know, following the mantra of do no harm. I think there's less potential harm from protecting more trees for the next 6 months, and then perhaps relaxing it after that if that's what the data says, than there is in protecting fewer trees and then trying to tighten the rules in 6 months. Because once you cut a tree down, it's cut. Now, I am mindful, and this is what staff's concern is they're saying 2 FTEs to monitor this permit issue, these permitted trees. So the question I had for Mr. Bailey, and I should have formulated this before, but I just thought about it now. You've said that moving the threshold from 75 to 35 is going to require additional resources, and administering the permits to cut one or a tree a year, one tree every 3 years, is also going to have additional resources. So of the entire 2.0 FTE that you're talking about, what portion is devoted, would you estimate, to administering the tree permits portion of the proposed bylaw?
Madam Mayor, I think it's important to kind of note the current context in terms of the FTEs and you know, the current staff resources right now, our current complement with our arborist, they're not adequate currently, in my opinion, to administer the bylaw. Like, we have a challenge there in terms of administering that effectively, providing good service to the citizens of West
existing
Vancouver.
bylaw.
The existing bylaw.
Yeah,
so
fair
we
enough.
have a problem now.
Okay.
So if you start adding things onto it, that is, we think we're being very conservative, cost effective, and I think optimistic in saying that 2 staff would cover going from 75 to 35. In terms of the specific proportion, that's difficult to say. I would say that the larger proportion of work in terms of the things that Councillor Cameron mentioned are on the administration side, but certainly there is a significant amount of work for both of the positions.
So I want to be clear. If we removed the ability to permit a tree removal every year or every 3 years in Ambleside and Dunderave, what would that do to the amount of staff that you need to administer that for the next 6 months?
Madam Mayor, without any significant thought to it, it may have an impact. Like, it may result in, say, a third of a staff person. But again, we're looking to hire somebody that you can't. Very difficult to attract somebody like a 2/3 of an arborist to come and do work on administering a bylaw, right? Just from a practical perspective, like just even putting a job posting
So
out there.
you think it would only take 30% of the work away?
Approximately. I mean, you going from 75 to 35 is the amount of trees. We haven't surveyed it, again, because, council put the motion on the floor on May 27th without any staff research on it. But our expectation is that it is a significant jump going from 75 to 35. As one of the speakers talked about, just in a block in Ambleside, there were, for example, I think 4 trees that were 75 centimeters in 4 blocks, and I can't remember the exact metric. But if you go to a 35 centimeter tree, we think that number goes to sort of like 5 to 10 times the amount of trees. And just, that's completely anecdotal without any data.
Yeah.
But then you're administering that, like you're administering 5 to 10 more times more trees in the district, right? And we're just saying 1 more admin person and 1 more arborist. I think that we're being, I think, conservative.
Okay, so.
Well, I don't know if Councillor Cameron's
I'll just
finished.
finish. Yeah, I'll just finish by saying that I think that I'm willing to defer elements of this proposal, but I am, like some of the speakers, disappointed that we can't increase the protections for the interim period until we get the LiDAR survey, because I don't know that the LiDAR survey is going to, at the same time, it's going to give us more information. It's not going to answer all the questions. It's still going to be a value judgment about how much effort we want to put into and emphasis we want to put onto preserving the trees that we have. Even if our canopy is 45%, we find out from the LiDAR survey, we still want to maintain it at 45%. If it's 25%, we still want to maintain it at 25%. So I don't think a LiDAR survey is going to tell us, well, we need to cut some trees down in the community. So, so I would be inclined to some form of amendment that Councillor Lambert is referred to, or Councillor Soprovich, but I also recognize what the mayor is saying about being careful how we go forward, and now staffing up these positions and creating greater bureaucracy is not my intention either. So I'm struggling with how to balance those objectives.
Councillor Lambert?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do think it's significant. I'm glad that Councillor Cameron sort of raised that point about the FTEs and the fact that the staff that are currently assigned to managing this activity are overworked. So part of this 2.0 FTE complement is to actually top up existing resources so that we can simply deal with what we're dealing with now. Never mind, I see Ms. McGuire shaking her head. Is that incorrect?
through the mayor, to Councillor Laver's question, when we did do, and it was admittedly rather quick because of the turnaround time from May 27th to now to bring back this amended bylaw, but we worked with bylaws staff as well as our land development staff that includes the city arborist, and the 2 FTEs is really just the net increase that we're estimating, and admittedly it is an estimate at this time, for the changes, not to sort of make us whole, as it were, for the understaffing that there is today.
Okay, well, thank you. That clarifies that. So that would be in response to this proposed amendment, and we would still be short of staff to provide the level of service that you would like to, which then could mean more people. But I go back to the fact that we're looking at something for 6 months, or at least that's what I'm looking. I'm looking at it as an interim thing, and without having to make a commitment at this time to staff, I'm sure that we could consider resources sort of kind of on an on-demand basis for the short term. I know you can't hire half an arborist, but you could contract with an arborist for 6 months to work for the district. I would imagine. So I just wanted to make that point. Given the nature of the issue, I don't think it should be a determining factor in going ahead with a more restrictive bylaw.
So anyone else want to, Councillor Soprovich?
Madam Mayor, so where do we sit with all this? I've heard a lot of rhetoric on this. Is it absolutely impossible to, on a recommendation on June 27th, to protect existing trees over 35 centimeters DBH for a period of 6 months? That's December, not too far away. We're off in August. That leaves you 4 months. Well, that's fine. And Ms. Lemus, certainly that wonderful financial lady that we have could find some money to do whatever. I'm being a little bit silly, but I've been around and I've looked and seen what's happened to property lines and to clear cutting of lots. And even in a 6-month period, there can be a lot of damage done. So I'm sure.
Ms. Nemes, did you want to say something?
Madam Mayor, if I might. So just to be clear, when we prepare our budgets, they're prepared on a very stringent basis, and based on conversations, we do monthly assessments of our financials as well as quarterly. And based on the last quarterly assessment, there is no additional room in our budget to absorb. Our permit revenues are down in the planning side of the house, and that has an impact. And so I think that ultimately, I'm certainly not opposed to the bylaw amendment that we had in front of, the interim bylaw amendment that we had in front of council. I think that ultimately, we would have to look at how we could shuffle resources throughout the organization and see exactly what could be done to achieve the administration as well as the permitting and the bylaws relative to a 35 dBH. So,
Ms. Lemus, does a staff member get in a car and go around the district looking at lots that might be potential for development? And
no.
How do they monitor all this?
So I'll allow Ms. McGuire or Jim to respond to that, but I think where I was going to go was that if this at some point becomes too much of a burden on the organization, we will be coming back. The ask for 2 FTEs was not a frivolous ask. And I think that going from 75 to Mr. Bailey's point, down to 35, actually will protect the trees, more trees that we currently have, and it will require much more administration and oversight. Full stop. Full stop.
Over a period of 5 or 10 years.
Over a period of
not 6
any
months.
period of time, We aren't seeing a lot of lots being cleared clearly. We're not seeing an awful lot of development at this point, but that could change. So I think we have to be prepared for that.
Okay, Councillor Wong, were you, okay. I just have in response, a few other comments. The issue really for me and why there's two issues around the work of the working group and how the amendments don't really respond to that. And also, unfortunately, we have no idea about our canopy, about the various neighborhoods, the differences between the neighborhoods. And I'm, as I said, just very reluctant. I think the LiDAR, and Mr. Bailey can help me, or Ms. McGuire, but the LiDAR will give us not only what an overall number is, but my understanding is we'll be able to get some specific area data. We may say there can't be any more cutting in Ambleside and Dudderiff. I don't know. It might be so lower. There's also the issue of researching best practices because, as I said, looking at the Seattle model, they measured their canopy, they looked at best practices, they set targets, and this is how you govern. This is how you make decisions. You plan, you execute, and you measure. And I really feel that we're very much guessing. Yes, I'm not going to deny there have been loss of trees, and I'm not going to deny there's an issue. And I'm also in full agreement, even though I wasn't here, with declaring the climate emergency. That is all true. But there is 42,000 residents in this community. We asked for their input. We had 9 of them working on this for 15 months. And to throw that out the window and kind of just and throw staff's recommendation out the window and substitute a number that's based on nothing. In fact, it's not even Vancouver's. It's kind of in between. I just think is we've got 6 more months potentially to do this, and I really think we should do it properly. We should get as much information as we can, and we should customize our response. And if it means that we have to hire more staff, at least we can go to the community and say, we need to hire more staff because we've got an issue and this is the data that we have seen. We actually are going to be able to look at 2013 to 2019. And it may be even worse than we think. I don't dispute this. But just to react, I don't agree with. And on the funding thing, I think Ms. Lemus is being diplomatic. I mean, our staff are working full out in a number of departments. And I think we have to be solid on our rationale and our research to recommend 2 more full-time equivalent staff positions. And I don't feel comfortable doing that. So that's my response to those. So in answer to your question, Councillor Soprovich, right now we're voting on the deferral motion, which has been moved and seconded.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on the deferring the other motions. If those don't pass, then it's open to council to make another recommendation around the amendments. But right now what's been moved and seconded is the deferral motion. So if there's no other speakers.
Yeah, just in reflecting on your comments, is it a quick rush to judgment to say that this council would look at protection of trees from 35 centimeters or higher for a period of 6 months? That's a rush to judgment? To me, it's common sense that we at least protect for that period of time. I'm not certainly going to be, I'm going to be very supportive of what comes out of the working group in their final and the information out of the LiDAR, certainly even in preparation for further expenses. I'm not making an issue with that. I'm just saying for this period of time, is it such a big deal? Apparently it is to some.
Well, the motion's on the floor and council can show their decision by voting how they feel. I mean, that's democracy.
So there's
So-
no motion for, there's no amendment, right?
Well, not, the motion is to defer right now, the four
Yeah,
components.
got that.
Yeah.
But there's no amendment to,
A deferral motion? No.
no, an amendment to maintain a 35 centimeter and higher, greater.
Not, that would have,
Voted on. If it passes, then away you go down that path. If the deferral motion is not passed by majority of council, then Councillor Soprovich's suggestion can be entertained.
yes. So it's the will of council, and unless I see any other speakers, I'm going to call the question. Okay,
So the question is the 3 points that you made up, read out,
motion to defer the other four, yeah. Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion to defer? All opposed? Councillor Soprovich, did you vote? Are you opposing the motion to defer?
Yeah, because I want to.
Yes. Okay, so the motion is defeated. So now we can go to the, if there's another motion that, yeah.
So, Madam Mayor, could I make a suggestion that for an amendment to the proposed amendment that would remove, delete Article 6.6? It's unfortunate that we are not able to display that.
Mark.
Excuse me, I'm actually looking at the consolidated bylaw, the tracking copy, but it should be the same number.
The interim tree bylaw document, do you have that?
Can I speak? Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to perhaps provide some advice to council, and I'll look to our corporate officer to provide me with some advice as well, Mr. Panneton. It's my understanding that council can give first reading to the bylaw and then suggest that amendments be made through a motion at second and third, if that's the course that you wish to go. And Mr. Panneton, I'll look to you for confirmation of that, because I don't know if it's necessarily congruous with what you said before, but I believe we can do that.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Bailey's correct. So staff can give first reading to the proposed interim tree bylaw, which is, I believe, what everyone's referring to right now as it currently stands, and then request that staff come back with modifications pursuant to whatever the direction is.
Point of order, Madam Mayor? But what that means is that because we would only have one council meeting left on Monday before September, what that'll effectively mean is we can't pass any, because you can't have adoption at the same time as second and third reading, so that means we wouldn't be able to adopt the changes until September if we did that. Is that correct, Mr. Panneton?
Madam Mayor, that is correct. Council is not permitted to adopt the bylaw at the same meeting at which it's given third reading. So based on the current timeline of the council meeting schedule, Councillor Cameron is correct.
Well, I guess the other question then is whether we just defer this till September, till we can get a coherent motion that preserves a 35 centimeter, or whether we try to do this on the fly.
As an alternative, so given that the LiDAR survey will be completed September, October, and analysis will be done on the LiDAR survey relative to 2013, 2018, the bylaw that is currently in front of council captures, I think, most of what council was hoping to achieve at a certain level. We recognize it may not be perfect, it may not certainly address what Mayor Booth is hoping for, nor what other councillors might not. But it is a compromise position. Until the LiDAR survey is complete, the analysis has been done. I think it addresses Councillor Soprovich's concerns to the 35 centimeters, Councillor Lambert's concerns. And again, it could be revised upon review of the LiDAR results September, October, November. If you were to give this, you could, first and second reading this evening and adoption on the 22nd.
But Ms. Lemus, that would mean that, for example, the bylaw as written allows for someone to get a permit to harvest a tree over 75 centimeters. So I don't know that that's a better state of affairs in the interim than just protecting more trees. In fact, it would, in some respects, throw more larger trees into jeopardy if we were to pass the existing bylaw. And that was not what I intended. And so this is one of the problems of me making the proposal before, and I don't fault staff for this at all. You're trying to make lemonade out of lemons. But in light of this, I'm concerned about trying to draft on the fly, Councillor Lambert, because we may end up passing something that has unintended consequences, and we have to take our lawmaking powers seriously. And I think that even if, as Ms. Lemus is suggesting, pass it like this, then we're allowing people to apply for permits, and then what we're gonna reverse that in 3 months. That would not be good governance to the mayor's point.
All right, so we're left with the deferral motion, and unless I hear anything further, I'm going to move on to the next item.
Oh, Councillor Lambert.
Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Lambert.
Well, we're just sort of leaving this issue hanging. I mean, I think one solution that would address Councillor Cameron's concerns and the risk identified with the 1 tree per year or 1 per 3 years can be achieved by adopting this interim amendment and deleting item 6.6.
We can't, my understanding is we can't do that. We can only direct staff to come back with a revision.
Madam Mayor, council could modify the bylaw on the fly. I mean, as long as it's not substantial enough that, significant rewrites are required. For example, if council is requesting the addition of a number of provisions, it would be very difficult for staff to wordsmith those. If council wanted to give first reading to the bylaw and then delete a provision and then give second reading as modified and then third reading tonight, then council could do that.
Well, again, I'm getting back to Councillor Cameron's point. This isn't really allowing council any opportunity to digest what the implications of this are. And you've just suggested this to me now, and unless, I haven't even had a chance to review it and the implications, so I'm reluctant to do that. So you're basically saying that you're taking the half of the amendment out?
Well, just one article, 6.6, that's it.
Well, the implications are that the amendment that was made was to protect more trees but allow flexibility and taking trees down, and you want to take the trees down, take out the second half.
That's correct.
Yes, so that's fairly significant.
Fine.
No.
But am I allowed to put that on the table and vote on that? Okay.
Yes.
So, Madam Mayor, just for clarity, if council does decide that they want to modify this bylaw, they'll still need to give the bylaw first reading as written, and then any motion can be put forward to modify it. So just so everyone's clear procedurally. Thank you.
You're not giving us good news, that's the problem. Okay.
Is there a motion on the table then?
Well, we would have to pass the bylaw as written, and then, or I guess we would have move the bylaw as written, and then an amendment could be made to it, or I think Mr. Panneton was actually saying we'd have to give first reading.
So, Madam Mayor, the process, council would have to give first reading to the bylaw as
written.
presented. Then council could modify the bylaw by a separate resolution by deleting section 6.6 or whatever it is that council decides. Then council could give the bylaw a second reading as modified, and then give the bylaw a third reading. And then that bylaw would come back on the 22nd for adoption. So there would be a 4-step process there.
Councillor Soprovich?
So, Ms. Lemus, is there anywhere in this document that says we would keep 35 centimeter and higher?
Yes.
Yes.
Where does it say that? I mean, it's,
Definition of protected trees.
okay. What section is
very
that? What,
beginning.
6? Is it 6?
No, it's at the beginning of
It's in the definitions.
At the beginning of the document.
So if we move forward on this, and Councillor Lambert make a motion amendment to it, is that where you're heading?
That's where I'm heading.
Okay. I'm okay with that, as long as it,
Madam Mayor, in addition to the proposed amendment that I think Councillor Lambert is going to make, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. McGuire, because there's also another amendment that council would need to make. As outlined in the staff report, the bylaw is not effective until January 2020, and that was to deal with staffing and make sure that we were staffed up. So if council wanted to achieve immediate effect on it, you would also have to amend those sections accordingly. So again, you could do it, right? You can do that.
So there's no advantage.
I'm going to change my,
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest we move on to the next agenda item. What that means is the interim bylaw, it's in place now, will stay, and then we can revisit this in September, because if nothing is changing until 2020, then this is entirely immediate.
Madam Mayor, though, again, just to make the point, that's what the bylaw as drafted says. If council chose, if Councillor Lambert wanted to make a motion, or any councillor chose to make a motion striking that provision, then you're able to do that. So if you want to, for example, have the bylaw come into effect post July 22nd, you can follow the procedure that Mr. Panneton outlined, deleting section 6.6. But also deleting, and I'll turn it over to Ms. McGuire, there's a couple of other relevant sections that I don't have off the top of my head that you would also need to delete to make
Mr.
January
Bailey,
20th.
this is very
That's fine. I'm just
unwieldy.
giving you.
I know, and I'm not faulting you, and I appreciate actually that you've illustrated very clearly why this is not a workable process at the council
Can I ask
table.
Mr. Riley one more question?
Yes.
So, but what you're saying is we did that immediately, or whenever 4th reading is next week. You're saying we don't have the resources to implement it.
That's correct. That's staff's perspective, is that you
So
don't
you
have the
can't
resources
pass the
to implement
bylaw and not be able to implement it.
That's
And
council's decision.
So the question is, how quickly can we staff up? But that's not a question we can have in the council chamber.
So, council, I'm very cognizant of the issues, and I think for the community, we're all very cognizant of the issues. But this issue, this matter, there's a reason why no previous council dealt with it. It's complex, it needs percolation, and it needs a proper process. So I'm suggesting we move on to the next item. Councillor Gambioli will be back as well. This is important to have her input on. And I think that in the meantime, staff can be working on getting this LiDAR baseline data so that we can actually craft something that isn't just another interim and get some good, solid final recommendations around this. That's what I would like to see, and subject to further a motion before me, I'm recommending we move on. Councillor Lambert.
So I appreciate all of the opinions around the table, but to close this out this evening, I want to move the motion to first reading of the interim bylaw. I want to put that out on the floor. To move reading of the first reading of the amendment as it's presented here in accordance with the process that Mr. Pannerton has outlined.
Is there a seconder for that?
I'll second.
And just call the vote and
Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed?
Okay.
it's defeated. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the,
Could I just confirm that Councillor Cameron was opposed to that? Thank you.
I was in favor of that. It was a 3-3.
3-3.
Yes, thank you.
Preliminary development proposal for Taylorwood Place, item 5.
Madam Mayor, as a brief, very brief introduction, the staff report recommends that the development proposal for Taylorwood Place proceed for consideration in advance of the local area plan for the Taylorwood corridor, and that the proponent owner conducts public consultation to explore the potential redevelopment of the site and obtain public comment. I appreciate council has some thoughts on this. I'd also like to point out that the owner and the proponent is in the audience, and I'd like to, if they would like to, provide a brief presentation to council. So. Thank you.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Madam Mayor, members of the council, and the staff for the opportunity to present today and consider our preliminary development proposal for Taylorwood Place. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hill Wang. I'm the representative and also the husband of Fanny Leung, the owner of Taylorwood Investments that hold the properties we'll be discussing tonight. My wife, Fanny, is a Canadian who grew up in Vancouver since she was 10. And I'll begin the presentation with a brief intro of the site. The property is located at the northeast corner of the intersection of Taylor Way and Keith Road. The site is about 6.5 acres, and on top of it, there are 21 single-family homes. And we currently own 19 out of the 21 lots, and we are in a discussion with the 2 remaining owners to reach agreements on a fair price. Since our initial discussion with the staff beginning in early 2016, we have waited patiently for 3 years for the Taylor Way corridor study to proceed. However, given the delays and uncertain timing of when the study will officially begin, we would like to push this project forward in hope that the staff and the council could advise to proceed with an OCP amendment and rezoning application prior to the study. If we were given the green light to proceed, we would then conduct public consultation with the larger community and carry on other necessary studies to support our development plan. In 2017, we held a community consultation workshop with our immediate neighbors. There were about 30 attendees, which revealed that there's great support from our neighbors for the type of housing options that we offered. Rental components are in huge demand, and flexible housing designs, such as lock-off suites, were quite popular. We also acknowledged that traffic and parking issues needed to be addressed. We received valuable feedback in the process, as well as constructive recommendations from staff and council members, which form the basis of our proposal today. We envision the redevelopment of the underutilized Taylorwood Place property will offer a broad range of housing options in an excellent location that's close to public transit, Park Royale, and other community amenities. As we know, West Vancouver population growth has been declining in recent years, and the community is also in desperate needs for housing options. Our development proposal will appeal to, number one, local workers who cannot find affordable housing in the community. Number two, young families who look for suitable housing options close to schools and public transit to work. And number three, empty nesters in West Vancouver who are looking to downsize. As you can see from the beautiful design drawings by NSDA architects, our proposal would provide up to 390 units in 5 terraced mid-rise apartment buildings. We are also proposing a significant market rental component, namely up to 40% of the total number of units, and possibly having part of the community amenity contribution to subsidize rents for those in need. The 2 buildings at the bottom left corner of the design drawing are proposed for rental units. This rental component supports the housing objectives in the OCP, as it would deliver new purpose-built rental housing in a location close to public transit and amenities. And we hope the council would agree that this offers significant public benefits. We will also incorporate different community facilities, such as playgrounds, underground parking, and possibly childcare facilities, inspired by shared economy. Car sharing system and shuttle services are also being considered to address traffic concerns. With substantial tree buffers on the property, as you can see from the conceptual drawing, and the trees we're planning to preserve and protect, our proposal is to design the height of the buildings in relation to the heights of the surrounding trees. This development is expected to have little visual impacts on our nearby neighbors, and careful consideration will be given to our adjacent church and school. So this is just recaps all the proposal highlights I described earlier. And as a closing note, I want to share that whenever my family and my little boy Tyler hang out in the West Vancouver neighborhood, we often see young families with kids like us playing in the playgrounds and elderlies taking a walk along the water at Ambleside. We want to create a new family community. We want to create a development that appeals to these people, a beautiful community that attracts the young and the elderly. We strongly believe that our proposed development can potentially offer the much-needed housing options in West Van, and it will blend into this beautiful, diverse, and increasingly vibrant community. Therefore, we seek for Council's direction on whether our proposal meets the OCP policy of 2.1.15 regarding community benefits, such that our preliminary development proposal can proceed prior to the adoption of the Taylorway Corridor Local Area Plan. And we are here to listen, to work with the community, the staff, the council, to find a solution to bring this project forward for the best interests of the community. And to end, I just want to say that we understand there are concerns from the community. And by sitting here yesterday and today, I can foresee a lot of challenges and obstacles, but we are committed. We are committed to find solutions that will alleviate those concerns. And instead of having the concerns be a bottleneck that prevents us and the city from developing housing options that the community really needs. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Sir, would you like to just stay if there's any questions from council? Sorry, our mics aren't working. So Councillor Wong, Councillor Saprovich?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. I didn't get to your meeting. Do you think 30 people showing up on such a massive project warrants a position to come forward?
Well, that was the first sort of workshop community consultation. But as I mentioned, if the green light is given, we want to get a direction whether this is something worth exploring and bringing forward. If that's given, then we'll of course conduct a much larger community consultation program.
Mr. Bailey, how did it come about that this gentleman can present a project to this council prior to the usual, which is he would go out, which he did, to the public, and then refer back to staff, and they in turn a report to us?
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor Soprovich, there are two council policies that you have that enable you to consider whether or not something proceeds. The first one is the interim rezoning policy, and the second one is section 2.1.15 of the official community plan. And both of those policies say, as a first stop, the general concept is don't come forward with a proposal until you've completed the local area plan, except where the proponent is offering, quote, significant social benefits, rental housing, and there's a list of things as determined by council. So it's within council's purview for you to decide if you want something to be greenlit to proceed or not. And hence this person's just asking that. They don't have an application. They're asking if they can proceed with preparing an application for future consideration. And the decision to allow them to do that is council's.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I have no more questions, but I want to comment when the motion's on the floor.
Yes, absolutely. Any more questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So there is a speakers list. It's actually a fairly short one. I'll just give a couple introductory remarks on this item just to set the context for those in attendance. First of all, council hasn't applied this interim zoning policy very often, which allows, as Mr. Bailey explained, applicants to submit projects outside of the local area plan. Thank you to everyone that's attended, as well as written counsel on this matter. Council is aware that there is strong community opposition to the proposed development. Again, I don't want to preempt the debate and democratic process, but in discussions with council, we agreed that I would convey that council is not inclined to move this project forward based on the information that we have. And so there is not a huge number of speakers, and my inclination is to allow anyone to still speak, given that information from council. So I'd like to give the opportunity to those that signed up, because it seems like unless there's only 4 or 5 that I've got in front of me. So I'll start with Kathy Palmer, and then Barbara Chaworth-Musters has signed up, and then Hans Crutzen. So it looks like 3 people have signed up for this matter.
Good evening. Sorry, I'm not sure if the speaker's on. Can everybody hear me now? Good evening, Madam Mayor and councillors. Thank you. If just a point of question then, if council is not recommending this go forward as a proposal, is there a purpose to us speaking at this time? Is the matter closed, or what is the next step in this process?
So the next step is to vote on it, and I think the council's going to articulate what they see as wrong or what they would need before it would go forward.
Sure.
So that would be what and again, I don't want to speak for everyone at the table, but that's how I see this, that there will be a fulsome opportunity for debate and discussion around this.
Thank you. If I may just take a few moments of your time. So I've been a resident of Cedardale for 19 years. My name is Kathy Palmer. Some years ago, I actually approached council when Polygon, for some of you who may recall, in 2010, approached Cedardale with a discussion of adding 160 units in the same location at Taylorwood. At that time, there were some preliminary parking studies done, traffic surveys of Taylorwood. This was all prior to the developments that were being proposed down in Park Royal and other parts of the community, in Ambleside and other areas for the development for rental housing and mixed-use housing and supporting the local OCP. 9 years later, we find ourselves, and as you can imagine, for any of those that traverse Taylor Way, we are certainly no better off than we were before, and significantly worse, even though we've made major improvements to our transit hubs and certainly looking at how we're addressing the community expansion. The challenges that we have in Cedardale make us a little bit unique. I'm sure every community in West Vancouver would like to believe themselves so. Cedardale has 2 roads in and out, and that's Keith Road and Inglewood. Without those roads, we are a trapped bunch of citizens sitting in our own little pocket of the community. All of us in that community recognise that there are certain times of the day that we don't get to leave our community. We plan our lives around our ability to exit onto Taylor Way and head across the bridge. And even heading up to the highway at times, if there are difficulties there, can be equally challenging. So when we consider how we involve the community in these discussions, how we look at our traffic studies, how we look at all of the surveys around parking, etc., we need to actually move a little bit beyond just the 2 or 3 local residents up to, is it 500 yards from the development site. The entire community is impacted. So to only seek responses from those folks that are immediately in the vicinity is not serving the purpose that I believe that council is trying to create in understanding what the community really requires. So when we talk about these things, we also need to look at what's in the community. We have a school, we have a church. There are times during our week and certainly during school year where traffic in itself becomes a major challenge. To do traffic surveys in a non-school time, in a non-school part of the year, is fictitious. That is not good data. So I highly recommend that we support council in your recommendation to defeat this proponent at this time. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Barbara Chaworth Musters.
I'll decline to speak.
Okay.
Council is supporting the motion.
Thank you very much. And Hans Crutzen.
Madam Mayor, council members, I've lived in Cedardale for 50 years, and this is the 4th time we've been under attack by developers because they see it as some kind of an appendix that councils in the past certainly haven't cared about because we're on the other side of Taylor Way, and it's a throwaway. The developer said that he talked with 30 immediate resident members. I'm very immediate. I'm on Gordon Avenue. Didn't talk with me. Nothing came around our area, and there's no enthusiastic support for this project, I can tell you right now. With the school, both schools, the French Immersion School and the Catholic School, we have a horrendous traffic problem. You wanted to put 390 units 100 yards away from Taylor Way when it comes out onto Keith Road. You can't handle it. It's impossible. So your main problem is always traffic, and it just won't do. The whole east side of Taylor Way should not be developed into high-rise, heavy-density apartments. It should be used for healthcare facilities and other things that don't have a steady flow of traffic all the time. Because the minute you put in more traffic, it's a mess right now, Taylor Way. It's a mess almost all day long. So if you remember, I was emceed the all candidates meeting at the Senior Activity Center, and all of you were present, and all of you said the one thing that I aim to do if I become elected is to ensure that we maintain the unique lifestyle that we have in West Vancouver. Well, this one project would just throw that right out the window because you are just going to totally ruin the lifestyle and the ability to enjoy our homes in Cedardale. We won't be able to do it because we'll be frozen in there. We won't be able to get out. If you want the old hook from developers, the same story all the time, rental units, rental units. You did that for Park Royal. I don't know what's happening there. You got the east side of Capilano River. That's another possibility that you're developing now. And take a serious look at Gordon Avenue and the Senior Activity Center and the plan that's being put forward there. There's lots of room there to move the activity center over and put a high-rise in on Gordon Avenue, and then put in a couple of apartment buildings there where the activity center is. And you've got traffic flow there, you've got buses, you've got everything. Not on Taylor Way. Taylor Way just can't handle it. And it's just not fair to the people of Cedardale to even give this, it's stillborn, this thing. Unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this matter? Okay, thank you very much. I will go to my notes then, and it is Craig Cameron, Councillor Cameron.
So I'll recommend the development proposal for Taylorwood Place as outlined in the report dated June 25th, 2019 from the senior community planner not proceed for consideration. And I'll just speak briefly to this, Madam Mayor. There's a few things. I don't fault staff for coming forward with this and seeking council's direction on whether we should apply our interim zoning, rezoning policy here. We have a general principle in the community that we don't proceed with significant projects in advance of local area plans, but we always, it would be bad governance to not retain some flexibility if there were projects of particular merit or opportunities that came up. You have to keep some flexibility if the benefit to the community is substantial. Unfortunately, I think this project is of a scale, size, and impact in Cedardale that is simply not suitable for the interim rezoning policy. It's not what that policy was intended for, and in fact is something that should proceed after a local area plan, where some of the structural and contextual issues like traffic flow, which is always an issue in West Vancouver, can be debated. I also note that this project is quite dense. It's not, I wouldn't call this a modest infill. It's quite, as I said, transformative. It's similar in some respects to the Evelyn Drive neighborhood scale. And so it takes a little more, I think we need a little more contextual direction of where we're going with Cedardale and how we're going to address some of the problems before we can really even consider something like this. And the community doesn't need to go through, and neither does the developer, the whole process. Before we come to that conclusion, we should just make that clear now. I will say in its response to some of the emails that I've received, there are a lot of people who enjoy their lifestyle in Cedardale, and they have nice single-family homes, and they see no benefit to themselves for changing the status quo. I understand that, and of course we all feel that way, but as we've made clear in our OCP, the status quo isn't really an option anymore in West Vancouver. We have to allow for infill. We need more housing alternatives. Evelyn Drive is full of people who have downsized in West Vancouver. It's serving the housing needs of West Vancouverites. There's a lot of West Vancouver residents that have left the community because they can't find housing that they need. So building more of what we already have more of than any community in the Lower Mainland, which is single-family housing, large single-family housing, is not the future. It's not efficient, nor does it meet the housing needs of the full range in the community. So we need rental. Purpose-built rental is certainly an amenity, and we need to look at ways of infill. At the same time, of course, we have to be doing it in a way that fits into the existing neighborhood as best as possible. But there will be compromises to be made, and there will be trade-offs, and I'm hoping we can have that discussion sooner rather than later in the context of a local area plan. And I'll just leave my comments there.
Any others? Thank you.
So, first off, I would like to ask Council that we might sit down and have a discussion whether the process that we know it as a policy now to allow an individual developer to come forward prior to any local area plans or other plans that we have. I think it's wrong to, in this day and age, to encourage that. I do believe that under the light of climate change and our natural capital asset, which we'll hear about tonight. I just no longer can accept the fact that we have an old process that says messages go out to 150 people. If we do a local area plan of the Taylor Way corridor, I suspect that the entire community be notified east of Taylor Way and be part of the transparent process that would come from that. What the local area plan will bring is something else. And as far as this development, to me it is, you're a very nice gentleman. You presented well. You got a lot of things happening there, but I think for me it's a little too massive right now. It doesn't mean that you can't come back later, but you'd be better off, I think, if you allow staff to go through a local area planning. I didn't support Taylor Way because they didn't finish the local area planning up the hill. I thought we got to have big picture. And, but I'm not opposed to the local area plan that might have some change in the area. But right now, that's the way it is.
Thank you. Councillor Wong?
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly looking at this area, I think of other neighborhoods that have large, busy stretches of road, Canby, Granville, and Vancouver, essentially a highway going through the community. And folks don't want to live on those sort of stretches anymore unless it's in multiplex sort of developments. So certainly I think that's one consideration, but like some of my colleagues, I'm uncomfortable without having that sort of broader picture of where we want to take this community in this part of the neighborhood. We certainly have an OCP that tells us we want better transportation, we want more diversity of housing, but in terms of finer detail, I think that's sort of the missing piece. And then the local area plan will give us that information of what sort of density will that look like. Number of floors, number of buildings, number of units, that sort of thing. So certainly, while I am a huge supporter of, finding different types of housing in the community, around the table we've often sort of joked that how I'm that missing middle generation that's left in West Vancouver, the 2%. When I show up, 1% is in the room. So certainly, I think of my colleagues and my peers that are looking for different types of housing, and so I think certainly there's something neat that can happen in this part of Taylor Way, along the entire stretch actually. But until we get that sort of finer detail, I'm uncomfortable just sort of doing what has been termed whack-a-mole planning or spot zoning. So certainly, I think having that bigger picture will certainly better inform us as a community, as a council, as to what goes best where.
Councillor Thompson?
Okay, is it working? Yeah. I'm more inclined to want to look at a project like this. The local area plan could take a while to come along with a big parcel like this, and I understand there's a few in the area. But I think what I would be looking for is more diversity on spot, more mixed-use commercial, perhaps even a coffee shop that the locals could walk to and enjoy, a drugstore or a small grocery store, something like that, mixed in with different types of housing or a healthcare facility, employee housing, a lot more diversity and benefit to the community. Even though Park Royal's right down the street, it'd be nice just to walk a block or two and pick up a few things. So I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll just say a few things. I won't go on too long, I promise. This policy is a good policy in that it does allow council to look at special projects and kind of not cut off your nose to spite your face by pushing everything way out. So it does allow us that flexibility, but I think to invoke the policy, it definitely has to be the right project. I did go to the initial meeting with the community, whenever that was, 18 months ago. It's a bit of a blur over the last year, as you can imagine. And there was actually a small group, and I wouldn't say that there was a lot of residents in the neighborhood. It was a mixture from across the community. And I guess when I went to that, I went away having expectations about what this project might look like. And I have to be honest, when I saw this, it wasn't consistent with what I expected. I did expect like Councillor Thompson mentioned, more of a creative mix. I completely agree with Councillor Cameron. We do not need any more single-family houses. They are unaffordable. We're losing population because people are trying to downsize. We can't attract employees. So we don't need single-family. We do have to look at using this site for other than single-family. So, but I expected more of a mix of ground-oriented, that missing middle, the townhouses, the row houses. Maybe there's an apartment building in there as well, and maybe that's rental, and maybe it's even non-market rental. The world is changing so quickly that now developers are even coming in with all rental as a base proposal, because that's what the market is looking for. So I won't say anything more, but I don't support this project. It looks to me like it's shoehorned in there. There's not enough creativity. There's not enough respect for the character of the neighborhood. And I hope that feedback is helpful to anyone considering this again in the future. Okay, I'll call the question. We've got the motion. All in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you. So the next item, natural capital in District of West Vancouver.
Good job.
Madam Mayor, if I might, I'd like to make a very short introduction. We have with us tonight Susan Todd from Salsa Sustainability Works, who's going to make a short presentation on the Natural Capital Report. But just for the benefit of the public, I'd like to just make a short introduction as to what it is we are doing here. Canadian local governments are seeking new strategies to improve their ability to deliver their core services in affordable, financially, and environmentally sustainable ways, and many are turning to modern asset management, which focuses on sustainable service delivery, not on individual assets that deliver services. So it matters less if the service comes from an engineered or natural asset, and more if the service is delivered reliably and cost-effectively, and natural assets can have a distinct advantage. So this has come out of the district's work in asset management. We have followed the lead of some leading organizations around the world, which are now beginning to look at ecosystem services and natural assets and the value that they provide so that they can be managed and accounted for in more or less the same way that what we more commonly think of as assets, our buildings and infrastructure, are managed. And we have put together this inventory with the hope that this can then lead to more integrated consideration of the use of the natural capital in the district. Thank you. And Ms. Todd will give a presentation on the report itself, and then I might, if I might, I would like to make a couple of comments about what our next steps would be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Mayor, councillors, and staff, thank you very much for the opportunity to present our work in this area. And I'll take you through a very brief presentation, and then as Ms. Gordon said, we'll take questions and present next steps. So the outline I'd like to take you through is to explain what our objectives were in doing this work, describe what the natural asset classes are that we worked on, the methods that we used to do the valuation, and a bit of an analysis on those 4 major asset classes, summarize the valuation, and then we'll talk about the next steps. So our objectives were to create an initial high-level inventory of natural capital. This was to be a high-level inventory, a starting point for discussion, and it would be something that could inform decision-making internally, but also raise public awareness about the value of our natural capital in West Vancouver, but more to start that conversation about what we have, and how natural capital is providing services that we rely on day in, day out. And considerations that I was charged with in taking on my role in this project were to make sure that we were involving a diverse team of staff, because staff have knowledge of all those natural capital assets. So we included people from planning, people in forestry, people of the engineering team. We had people from communications and just a wide variety. The environment team, the parks team. So that was important to tap all that district knowledge. We wanted to use previously published work. Doing a natural capital assessment can be a time-consuming and an expensive process. And we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we wanted to rely on work that's been done, and we were very fortunate in that there have been some pretty major studies done locally, one for the Lower Mainland and one for Howe Sound, so we had a great base to operate with. We also submitted it to an external panel for credibility. That was important because this is an area where different economists can have different points of view. And I'm not an economist. I've got an interesting hybrid background in that I'm a CPA. I've also got a master's in natural resource and environmental management. But most of the time, this kind of work is often done by economists. So we brought 3 of them, ecological economists, together to vet this work. Because of the idea that this would go to the public, there was an appetite to make it really engaging and easy to read. And that's why you'll see in the report, I don't normally have exclamation marks in my reports, but this was to evoke emotion and have people feel that our natural capital here is worth something. And then to anticipate challenges, and I guess I'll find out tonight whether I did that. So right up front, the group that we brought together from staff identified that the key natural asset classes we want to work with here are our forests, waterways, foreshore, and parks and open space, sort of taken together. And I'll be describing each of those as we go on. The valuation methods that get used in an assessment like this it's basically looking at the area of each ecosystem type and the services that it can deliver. So we could look at the area of the forests and consider the services that the forest can deliver, such as sequestering carbon, and that those services have a value. And so by multiplying out the value per hectare times the number of hectares, you can get a value for the annual services that are delivered. We drew on the district's own GIS work and some also Metro Vancouver's sensitive ecosystem database to identify the area, the hectares of each ecosystem type. And then we got the values from these key studies that I talked about, Howe Sound and Lower Mainland. So they had done the work of doing all the literature review and identifying for that ecosystem type and the service that we were interested in, what a reasonable range of values would be. So we didn't have to go out and do primary research on that. So some examples of the kinds of services that ecosystems can deliver that are applicable here. Forests are providing services in filtering water, in cleaning the air, in sequestering carbon. Waterways do a very important job in helping manage stormwater. And they also provide habitat for aquatic species, but also many other species that would live in the areas around them. The foreshore, all the beautiful beaches here make it evident that the recreation is important, but also a healthy foreshore can protect the area further inland from erosion. And then parks and open space, as well as providing a place for recreation. The soils under that grass, the soils under all the shrubs and trees, they can store carbon for us as well. So this is just a few examples of the ecosystem services that we studied. And the methods that we use, and I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just to recognize, these are well-established methods that economists use, not only in valuing natural capital and ecosystem services, but in all kinds of studies. Things like avoided costs. So an avoided cost would be avoided healthcare costs by not having air pollution. So we can value avoided costs. Replacement costs, second from the bottom, is another familiar one. So if we can replace an upgrade to stormwater management because our creeks have healthy banks and they're able to channel water, then we've provided replacement because it's the same service delivered by natural capital. So if there are further questions on these, I can go into them later, but I'll keep it brief for now. So for forests, the valuation that we found for forests was driven mainly by the role of forests in regulating and filtering water. Climate change and carbon sequestration was also important, but the way that forests absorb water through the leaves, through the root systems, and store it away and then release it, they're providing a really valuable service. We looked at, for each of these asset classes, some of the implications. What are the things that put this asset class under threat and that we need to think about? And so climate change is something that's definitely affecting our forests, both the upper forest and the urban forests. Climate change is so important because it not only makes us need our forests even more to help us with heat stress and things like that, but right at the time when we really need our forests, that's when they could be most under threat. There are issues around managing competing uses and trails and for development, and as we certainly heard tonight, protecting trees on private land is a key issue. Waterways, the issues here were clean water supply, so the reservoirs are providing clean water. This is where replacement costs can come in. If you had to obtain that clean water from some other source, what would that cost? And then regulating the water flows. So development, managing the riparian area, looking after the species there, and then climate change again, which can affect water flows, lead to more drought. That's an issue for waterways. The foreshore valuation was driven primarily by recreation values and also by the erosion regulation. But I have to note here that there's really a lack of studies for West Coast ecosystem services. So there were some, for example, we would have really liked to have seen what the value was of that storm surge protection that the foreshore is offering us. But we could not find a study that we really felt was relevant enough that we would want to use that in this place. So that's a service, and there are several that we identified that we weren't able to put a dollar value on because it just would have been too much of a stretch. There weren't the reliable studies out there for this kind of ecosystem. So for reasons like that, the valuation that we come up with is probably a lowball estimate because there have been a lot of services that we recognize exist and we can't value them yet. Sea level rise will be an implication that we need to be thinking about, and we acknowledge the shoreline restoration work that's already being done. And then parks. This section we treated in a more qualitative way because there's so much overlap. Many of our forests are in parks. Much of our foreshore is in parks, so we didn't want any double counting. So we looked mostly just at parks in terms of grasslands and shrubs, so those ecosystem types, and we focused on the carbon storage that's in soils as being the issues that we hadn't covered in other areas. The parks and open space provide enormous services in terms of people's health. They're getting out and exercising, just mental health from being exposed to parks. And the aesthetic values, the cultural values, all of these things are very important, and we were not including, we've talked about them in the study, but we don't have dollar values attached to those. We can imagine in the future that there'll be even more demand as West Vancouver grows, that increased conflicts in use, so that's going to be another issue we need to manage for this asset. And we can love them to death, and ecosystem degradation can result. Invasive plants was another one that was flagged by the team. So those are the 4 areas that we studied, and then summarizing the valuation, I'll just, the numbers are pretty big. These are all expressed in thousands of dollars, and the 2 columns on the left reflect an annual service. So this is the flow of services. So we can say 27 million to 89 or 90 million would be the range when we multiply everything out of the value of those annual services being delivered. And then we used a perpetuity calculation to say what is the value of receiving those assets or those services in perpetuity, and from that we arrive at the value of the asset. And so the low estimate would be 1.1 billion, and the high estimate would be 3.2 billion. So that's a pretty significant asset if we total up all those various classes. But again, as I say, there are a lot of services being delivered that haven't even been factored in here. So big as these numbers are, they're still pretty conservative. And next steps. Did you want to speak to this, Isabel?
Our intention was to publish a report in a more possibly user-friendly format than the report we've presented here to council, something more in the way of a booklet with illustrations that we could give to people. There's also been considerable interest expressed in possibly having some workshops or open houses to talk about this. And so certainly we would be more than happy to consider that. But the key thing that I wanted to do, or that staff wanted to do when we began this process, was to get these natural assets into our asset listing, which we have for our tangible capital assets right now, so that they could be considered in decision-making in future and integrated with our future decisions. And we can come up with what you might call an ecosystem strategy to preserve and maintain these assets. There has been some success. For instance, the town of Gibsons has had success in actually writing natural capital asset maintenance into their DCC bylaw, so that when development impacts natural assets, some compensation is received for that, and some ability to preserve the assets is received. And of course, we've also feel that here we have established a baseline, and we can monitor and update the values. And the LIDAR study that was mentioned earlier this evening, and all of the work that staff are doing continually in order to understand the condition of these assets and what needs to be done to preserve and enhance them can be supported by this work. Thank you, Your Worship.
Technology working again?
Madam Mayor, it seems to have magically fixed itself, so we're probably just going to try and keep the council presentation screen on for the rest of the evening so that we don't boost it again, but we'll just keep our fingers crossed on this one.
I think you've got something there, because just turning things off and on, which is my go-to technology fix, often fixes things. So I don't think we should touch anything or turn it off. I agree. Okay, so we'll start with Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, I was going to say perhaps it was because I'm the only millennial in the room, and I turned on my microphone and things just worked. And then things started lighting up, so perhaps that was it. But
thank you.
I don't know.
Wong.
I don't know. Thank you for this presentation and your report. It's very thorough, and I had a few questions for you. When you come into terms of creating all these valuations, is it appropriate to say that another community, that, for example, that has a very different environmental context, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Athens, Greece, they have different ways to measure their unique context in terms of their valuations, for example, because they may have different types of trees or less trees or more trees or whatnot. So is it reasonable to say that if, say, Phoenix is compared, that they're likely to be poorer in terms of natural asset value, or it's not comparable, it's not apples to apples? Does that make sense?
If I've understood you correctly, I think there would be a difficulty in comparing the bottom line, saying, okay, when I said ours is 1 billion to 3
Right.
billion, for example, and say, well, we're 1 billion to 3 billion, how are you, Phoenix?
Right.
I don't think we could do that. Where we can compare is when we have a service that's delivered through a particular ecosystem, then, and you can find that in a like if Seattle had done research and they had done research on their parks, their trees,
Right.
whatever, and the service that they were providing was similar to the service that we are receiving here, then that's when economists use this approach of benefit transfer or value transfer.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we cannot compare ourselves to a different municipality, say Los Angeles, Phoenix, Galveston, Texas, because not apples to apples, correct? Is that what you're saying?
I think that would be challenging to
Sure.
do that on a bottom line basis.
And so I guess that leads to my other question is then that if the climate continues to change in 200, 300 years or whatever time span, and the lower mainland is not anymore what we know it as today, then therefore theoretically we can also not compare it to say that we are therefore poorer off, correct? Because it'll have transformed into a different context. Or is my logic not sound?
Well, poorer off would be in relation to the services that you're able to receive. So the municipality wants, the district needs certain services.
Right.
And if we are able to get a certain services from our forest today, and that's in terms of cleaning the air or absorbing water, and the forest in the future due to climate change, as you
Right.
mentioned, isn't able to provide that anymore, and we therefore have to go, and some of those services are replaceable. You can buy them through building
Sure.
things. Others, they're just lost forever. But if you're having to pay for things that you didn't pay for before, I think we could say that we're poorer.
Right, I see. Okay, and then my last question is with respect to the 27 to 90 million range in terms of services or benefits provided to the community. That's a pretty big range, and so how does one digest that, as it were? 27 million gets you probably a home on Point Grey Avenue. 90 million is the annual expenditure for a small island nation, Palau, for example. Actually, I looked it up. And so, how does one reconcile those two different extremes? Do we pick a number in the middle to say, this is our average annual benefit? Or, how does one
Yeah, it's a very
practically
good
use
question.
that number?
It's a very good question, and so I'll go back to the objectives of the study, which were to raise public awareness and to start a conversation. And we now have some numbers on the table which effectively were zero before. We really weren't taking account of these services that we were receiving. Nature day in, day out was cleaning the air for us, and we were treating it as if there was no value in that
Right.
whatsoever. So it at least gets us thinking. I agree with you, it's a very wide range. I don't know that sawing off in the middle so that you can have one number is going to be terribly helpful. I think it spurs discussion to say, well, which of these do we want to focus our energy on in terms of understanding better? And there might be, next steps might be, well, we want to do some research on certain asset classes, or we are going to be able to do this in conjunction with other things we're already planning to do.
Right.
Like the LIDAR study is something that's going to help us with those forest numbers. It might help. So there's going to be things that the district does anyway that will help narrow that range and develop more West Vancouver specific numbers, I would think.
Sure. And then I guess I had one sort of follow-up question to those questions then. So say West Vancouver, we do the best that we can to maintain our natural assets in perpetuity, right? You know, we are this pristine bubble, as it were. But then the surrounding region changes for the better, for the worse. Then obviously then these numbers will change as well, right? So it's not necessarily a reflection on how well or how poorly we maintained or didn't maintain our natural assets, but it's in relation to the broader context that we're in. Is that,
Yeah,
is
that's
that safe to
absolutely
say?
true.
Right.
I think all of this has to be viewed in the context of the Lower Mainland as a whole, and it just maybe spurs us to have dialogue with our neighboring municipalities and say this is something collectively we need to deal with. But it's a very valid point.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you for those good questions, Councillor Wong. Councillor Soprovich?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's very interesting to know that this is the first capital needs program in all of British Columbia. I think only Edmonton has done one. So it's a real team effort, but I want to direct my questions to the jewel of City Hall.
Our own natural capital
So, Ms. Gordon, there really are no boundaries. So, I mean, it's like climate change. It's everywhere, and so we are going to absorb from other areas the benefits that they've already started if they were going to do this. That's number one. Am I correct in that?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Soprovich, yes. One of the characteristics of natural assets is that they do not observe municipal boundaries. So those that are, in a sense, upstream from us will affect the downstream, and what we do will affect what happens in other areas. Because it's nature is a system, everything works together. And one of the recognitions that comes out of this type of work is that all of our constructed assets are in fact part of a system as well, and they're actually part of the same system. So in terms of delivering the services, all of these things need to work together. And the more that we can in fact work with this system and the better we can understand it, the more beneficial it will be, and in many ways, not the least of which is financially. So it's a financially sustainable asset model that we are striving for here.
Okay, and so working with natural assets, that is where we eventually could see savings and costs of things that we do structure-wise and other things, I'm assuming.
That's correct.
Then, in the financial side, it is going to be joined to the asset levy?
It's possible that there will be some impacts on the asset levy from adding these assets into our asset listing. But one of the advantages of natural capital assets is that generally their maintenance is not very high, and their replacement costs are frequently, there are no replacement costs. As long as you maintain the asset will basically regenerate itself. So they do not depreciate in the same sense that constructed assets do, and that is one of the reasons that it's financially advantageous to work with natural capital as much as possible. On the other hand, climate change was mentioned several times in the presentation, and climate change is having impacts on the natural capital. And whether we can, by any maintenance method that we can devise, whether we can ameliorate that or adjust to that, there may be expenditures that are worth making in that area because the natural capital services are so valuable.
Ms. Lemus, where do I send this document so that Ms. Gordon and staff can get an award? Because it's out there, obviously. This is the first of BC, folks. I think it's a tremendous piece of work, and it will come to fruition as we get into it. Council and others are going to understand the benefits behind it. So great job.
Thank you, Councillor Soprovich. So Isabel Gordon also sits on the board of Municipal Natural Asset Institute.
MNAI.
MNAI. So, so she is spreading the word, and she is actually supporting this throughout the region to the, you know, I mean, this really is leading edge in many ways, and I don't think that we've fully explored all of the potential, but Susan's done a fantastic job of her work in bringing this all together, and I think we're at the very beginning stage. I do want to make sure, though, that Isabel clearly gets recognition for this fantastic work and the leading edge aspect of it. But I think just to ensure that there's peace in the valley, the financial, the inclusion of the natural capital assets and inventory, I think it's important, if Isabel, if you wouldn't mind, expanding on how they are going to be incorporated into our financial statements, because I think that might have some people a little bit on edge at this point. So we'll just.
So we, through MNAI, we are actually working with the accounting profession to see if we can establish a recognition for natural capital assets in financial statements. There's a number of issues to be wrestled through there, but valuation, this is a new way of doing, not from an economic point of view, but from an accounting point of view, this is a new way of doing valuation. And there's also, of course, issues around the ownership of natural capitals that ordinary assets, you either own them or you don't generally, so there's no particular issue with whether they should be included or not. So we're working with the accounting profession, and they're very, very interested at the national level in coming up with some standards. In the meantime, what we have proposed to do is include them in a note to the financial statements, and we've discussed this with our auditor, Mr. Cox of BDO Dunwoody, and he sits on the national board, the National Standard Setting Board, and he is very supportive of that. So we will be including this in our annual report. When I say that we'll add it to our asset ledger, though, that is the working document that we have on which we base the asset levy and on which we make our 20-year forward plans for asset maintenance. And because they'll be included there, the various asset managers will be providing us with maintenance plans and suggestions for further work. In some cases, what we need to do is obtain more data. We're getting into very technical areas, which are possibly somewhat contentious. I think we heard quite a lot last night about flood control levels and what foreshore management and a lot of technical information there. It's not all cut and dried, that's for sure. Tonight we heard a lot about tree management. Once again, it's not cut and dried. There are a lot of issues that need to be considered. But what we hope is that by putting these into our asset management framework and putting them into our financial statements, as I say, we've opened the conversation, we've opened the dialogue, and we've created the recognition that these ecosystem services are very valuable and need, at a minimum, at least as much consideration as we're giving our other assets and possibly more. Thank you.
And finally, Madam Mayor, Ms. Gordon, is this plan and concept is going to filter through the entire staff of our community?
Oh, it already has.
We had a really broad range of staff involved in putting the report together, so definitely the staff are aware, and we'll continue to work on that for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and I do want to just say thank you for this work, and thank you, Ms. Todd, I believe, and Isabel. And it sounds as though this is going to be a developing area in both financial as well as infrastructure acknowledgement, but even potential offset, because what you're saying is there's a lot of this natural infrastructure, if you will, that can take pressure off of building stuff. So I think that's a positive thing. I think that it's interesting that the community is coming around to some principles that have been acknowledged by First Nations for many years that we can learn from, around respecting the land, what the land provides, and supporting that for future generations. And this is sending us in the right direction to underscore those values for our environment. So thank you for the work, and there's, as you said, a lot of additional benefits that haven't even been quantified around personal health, in addition to infrastructure and other investment recognition. So, all right, so on that note, I will turn it over. Sorry, Councillor Cameron, I didn't see you on the screen.
Well, I was just going to make some comments, but I don't think there's a motion on the floor yet, is there?
Not yet.
Completely blown through the comments, questions, distinction. So
Yes, fair
let's
enough.
put the motion on the floor and I will comment to it.
Councillor Soprovich.
I will recommend, Madam Mayor, that as described in the report dated June 10th, 2019, regarding natural capital in West Vancouver, 1, the inventory of West Vancouver's natural capital assets attached as Appendix A be received for information, and 2, consideration of the value of natural capital and ecosystem services in the District of West Vancouver be incorporated into the district financial planning, asset management, financial reporting, and capital budgeting processes and decisions.
Second.
Okay, so would you like to say anything further, Councillor Soprovich?
I think this is going to grow over time. I do believe that it's maybe not quite common in people's minds at this point in time, but I think it's going to grow as we look at all our different natural assets and find out how we, in fact, can incorporate them into things that we do in the district as well as development. So I really support and thank Isabel and yourself for the nice presentation. Thank you.
So Councillor Thompson, I'll make a note, and I think Councillor Cameron is the seconder, and I think Mr. Barker might be, are you signing up for the public question period or this item, Mr.?
This item.
This item. Yeah, did you want to speak to this item, Mr. Barker? Sorry?
I would like to.
Yeah, don't turn down an invitation, just go for it.
This was a most interesting and a most beneficial presentation, and I congratulate staff, Isabel, and your department, and for Ms. Todd and your corporation for what you've done. It's a major step for the community to be recognizing the natural assets, and people really turn their minds when they start thinking about value. It really starts to pay attention. And the word ecosystem services, that's a brilliant phrase. It just echoes. Let nature get on with what she can do. The breakdown is perfect with parks and the waterways and forests and the foreshore. That's just a perfect balance. And I speak to you today as John Barker, resident of West Vancouver, but also president of West Vancouver Streamkeepers. And all of this plays into the hard volunteer work that we do in the community that benefits everybody. But we are the voice for fish, and we are the voice for habitat. And we are well received by council and the community, and we thank you for that. But where I'm going with this is just letting nature get on with things, and I'll give you a couple of quick examples. In April of 14th last year, 2018, and on April 30th, we had 2 fish kills. One on Wood Creek, there were 40-something trout died there, and on Larson Creek out by Horseshoe Bay, we had 76 trout killed there. virtually a wipeout of those streams. And there was a lot of pressure. How do we rehabilitate those streams? Do we bring fish in from other areas? What can we do? And there was a lot of toing and froing, and the thought was, well, look, let nature have a crack at it. And both of those streams are recovering, which is just unbelievable when you think of the devastation. And we know the cause of one of them was high pH from the ground stabilization. But this is just an example, and many of you will have traveled up the coast and gone into old cannery sites, old logging sites, and they're just perfect examples of letting nature get on with it. So our task in West Vancouver has been to protect and, where possible, enhance and improve the habitat that we have. Road crossings where there's culverts, just about every one of them have got baffles in them and allow a movement of any amphibians and fish up through the streams and back down when you've got out-migrating smolts. It's a fabulous story. West Vancouver compares to no other community. And think about how many urban places in the world can you go and find the number of salmon we have returning to our streams. And it's true credit to the people that led before and recognized that. Management of development, so it's done responsibly. And this assessment on natural capital will just do huge things as far as raising awareness in the community. So I congratulate Council, and I would encourage you to stay the course. And to your department, Ms. Gordon, thank you very much for bringing this to us tonight and sharing it with the community. And congratulations to your company, Solstice. It's terrific. I just want to pass that word from the stewardship group, but the response and the receptiveness and the excitement by Council, that's very rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so now I'll go to Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. I mean, this is incredible work, and it is somewhat of a change in mindset as much as anything else. We're evolving in some respects. If you listen to the news, you sort of think if everything's going to pot in the world and everything's getting worse, but in some respects, I think we are improving, and you can see it, for example, in the British properties where you have a landowner that's purchased the land 80 years ago, and they've been developing as it goes across, and each development sort of has the way it's done reflects the mentality of the time. In the older parts, the creeks were, you're built right up to the creeks, and even 20 years ago, some of the neighborhoods, Whitby, for example, almost all the trees were cut down outside of the creeks. Now with Rogers Creek, you see 40% of the land being preserved as green space. You see the setbacks for the creeks that much larger. You see more concentration of development in smaller spaces to preserve natural areas. And I think what we can expect as we go further west is even more and more of that, with the objective that we don't have development in certain areas of West Vancouver at all, and that we preserve that natural capital as it is, and then we transfer those development rights to the remaining portion where it can be serviced and where can be the least disruptive. And so I think that we are evolving. 30 years ago, we wouldn't have thought anything of just culverting a creek. Now I think any development would look first to maintaining the creek and even dayletting creeks that have been culverted. So, this is a change in mentality, and we know that the world is run on money. Money is a proxy for value. If you can't value something, it doesn't often end up on the ledger and the balance sheet or reflected in the decisions. And this isn't just some airy-fairy kind of idealistic notion of valuing nature. There's an actual economic value to nature, and that's, aside from the spiritual and aside from all the other elements. So I do think this is great. I'll finish just by saying I was talking to some members of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has something called the Green Municipal Fund, and they do groundbreaking sort of green projects across the country, transit projects, development projects, green space, waste projects. And they were asking me, what we do in West Vancouver, and I mentioned a natural capital assets inventory, and they honestly really hadn't heard anything about it. So, I mean, I don't know if that's, yeah, and I don't know that, I mean, I think that just reflects that this is something that is quite unique and it's emerging, and we're happy to play a part early on in leading. So thank you for everyone's work on this.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson? Councillor Thompson didn't get queued in, so I don't know, there might be a...
It seems to be broken again for
Again,
some
yes.
unfathomable reason.
No, I'm fine. It's working again.
Okay, Marcus.
I blame Marcus.
Yeah. I just
Councillor
want to say
Wong.
thank you so much. This is exactly the type of work and initiative that I think is essential moving forward with climate change. And this is the type of work that we can really benefit from. And to John Barker's points, how much he values it and will utilize it. So many of our groups here will, and citizens. So I'm entirely impressed with the work and very proud that it's coming from our district. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that didn't show up on the queue? All right, so I'll call the question on both the elements of the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Move to item 7, and this is Councillor Wong. And Councillor Wong, you're open to provide it as written or move it as written, the item 7 motion.
Out verbatim, like Councillor Soprovich. I move all of them as written.
Madam Mayor, sorry, they still have to be one
We
at
have
a
to break
time.
them down, don't we?
Yes, but they
Okay.
still be as written one at a time. Thank you.
As
I move
written
the first one
It's
as
my
written.
fault, I should have been, yeah, okay. All in favor? Opposed, carried.
I move the second one as written.
Second that.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
I move the third one as written.
Second again.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
Move the fourth one as written.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
Move the fifth one as written.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
I move the sixth, have I lost track? Fifth? Sixth as written.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, carried.
Move the seventh as written.
And I finally,
Second.
second that.
All in favor? Opposed, carried. Mr. Panatin?
Madam Mayor,
Did you
that
get
was
all of that down?
them, and item 8 is withdrawn, so that takes us to the proposed zoning bylaw for Ross Crescent.
All right, so this is to remind everybody on the zoning solely, on the accretion issue. The public hearing is closed. We can't receive any more public input or information on this. So then there's no speaker, so that's not an issue. Well, there is a speaker, but we can't receive any further information on this, so that will have to follow.
I'll make the motion, it's supposed to be there, whatever.
Yes, so Councillor Soprovich is out, so
I'll recommend the proposed zoning bylaw number 4662, 2010, amendment bylaw number 5028, 2019 be read a second time.
and I made a mistake, Councillor Cameron. Mr. Panatin was going to make some introductory
Oh,
remarks.
sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's mine.
Madam Mayor, sorry, just to reiterate that this item is only regarding the public hearing, which was held and closed yesterday. So specifically, it's regarding the rezoning from Marine 1 to the RS4 single-family zone. Members of the public can still make submissions regarding the development variance permit during public questions or on the July 22nd meeting when the DVP comes forward for council's consideration. Thank you.
Okay, so that's just a kind of reiteration. Councillor Soprovich, Councillor Cameron made the motion while you can second it if you like.
What motion did he make?
Sorry, number nine. The zoning on the Ross Crescent. Okay, thank you. So, all in favor? Oh,
We can't ask actually questions
yeah, we
anymore.
can't really bring any, okay. I mean, clarity is allowed, but it's a fine line between clarity and additional information, so. Mr. Panatin?
Do you have something you want clarified?
Is it a clarification question? Okay. So then I think we better vote on the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried? And then the next motion?
Bill? I'll move that the proposed zoning bylaw number 4662-2010, amendment bylaw number 5028-2019 be read a third time.
Seconder? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So that deals with that matter. Number 9, yes?
Madam Mayor, I will-
Yes, and I'm
Brief
going
comments?
to indulge Councillor Cameron to speak. He's not going to be here next week, so he promised me he would keep it brief.
Yeah, I think this is after, well, yeah, it's all relative. So no, I'm going to keep it brief. I will be less than a minute. After all the submissions made yesterday on the DV, on the flood control level and on the variances
Wait a minute, Bill. We have quorum. Okay, sorry.
requested for the house, the Heffel house, I think I'm not going to be here next week. I'm going to be out of the country, so I'm not going to be here to vote on it, but I really hope my colleagues will consider deferring this matter. I think at the very minimum, we need to have a third-party peer review of the NHC report that was presented. So we make sure that we have confidence in the conclusions. I think secondly, we need to have a report that covers whether there are mitigation measures that could reduce the wind and storm surge portion of the FCL, which is about 1.19 meters, whether we can get that lower through some sort of measures in the foreshore or on the beach. And then we have to figure out if those are economical, who's going to pay for them. But I certainly want to explore that before we decide on an FCL. And I think that the variances on the home, I have concerns about several of them. I think we can make the house less impactful on the neighbors in some respects, and we should consider that. So I do not think it should be, I'm hoping that it isn't decided on next Monday, and I'm hoping that we can go back and make it a better project, make sure we have our background information is verified, and then and then I also think that we need to proceed forthwith with an overall development variance permit for the whole area and the flood control level, because the way we should be doing this is on a more holistic level and not just doing it in relation to one particular project. Although I do note that each property in these areas may have a varying FCL because of local topographic features and aspect and such. So that's my hope, and I think there's a path forward through this. I'm hoping there's some form of compromise that we can build a house that's going to withstand sea level rise and also make it less impactful on the neighbors.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to item number 10, proposed fees and charges bylaw. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you. I'll recommend that fees and charges bylaw number 5025, 2019 be adopted.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. No new business. Moving over to the consent agenda, Councillor Cameron.
Madam Mayor, I'll move the consent agenda items. I have to read them out because nobody knows what they're as written because we can't see them. Item 12.1 regarding Ambleside Dunderave Business Improvement Association 2020 budget and 2018 audited financial statements. Item 12.2 regarding correspondence lists, and item 12.3 regarding resolution for 2019 UBCM conference regulating single-use items. And I'll put that on the floor if someone can second it, and I'll just make some very, very brief comments on two of the items.
Sure,
Somebody
so
second
that is on the floor.
Okay,
Councillor
so
Thompson.
on item 12.1, I'm the liaison to the ADBIA. I think Ms. Jones is doing good work, and I do think the ADBI is providing value for money with the branding exercise and what's going on, some of the initiatives that are quite exciting. And so I do think these are just the financial statements and budget, but I think the merchants in the community are getting value for money. On item 12.3, which is regarding our resolution for the UBCM conference regarding regulating single-use items, I'll just be clear, we've already passed this as a council. The reasons coming is that the UBCM executive wanted a couple of minor changes to the form of the resolution. We're going to be in the resolution book. It'll be debated at UBCM. I've taken a resolution to the Zero Waste Committee at Wet Metro. They've endorsed it. I have members of the UBCM executive who've spoken in favor of it. I've sent it to the mayors around the region and some that I'm in contact with. And I'm hoping that we can get municipalities across the province to put pressure on the province to allow municipalities the power to regulate in respect of the environment and more specifically in respect of single-use items such as plastic bags or straws or styrofoam containers. I note this is particularly topical because last week the BC Court of Appeal came down with a decision overturning Victoria's plastic bag ban, and the basic grounds the Court of Appeal said is they thought the bylaw had merit, but because the community charter limits what municipalities can do in respect of the environment, that Victoria didn't have the authority to pass that ban. And so I think that's wrong, and I'm hoping we can all advocate forcefully from West Vancouver and the North Shore and across the province to pressure the province to give us the ability to act when our community asks us to.
All right, thank you very much. No further speakers. I'll call the, Councillor Wong.
Only, or can it be anything on the consent agenda, or questions rather?
Madam Mayor, through to Councillor Wong, you can speak on any item in the consent agenda while the motion's on the floor.
Great, thank you. I just had a question for, I suppose you were the last staff member left, say our colleagues across the way. The ADBI report, because we give them a $500,000 grant a year for 10 years, do they report back to us in terms of deliverables, achievables, and that sort of stuff? I just wanted to see what has happened in the past.
And just for clarity, it's not a grant that they get, it's a property tax levy.
It's not tax dollars.
It's not property tax, residential property.
It's called the grant here.
Yeah, sorry, but I understand, but I just want to make sure that people are thinking that we're writing just to check that it's a
Sure.
tax levy.
But we do keep them accountable in terms of delivering on their objectives. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions or on that? All right. We're on the consent agenda, and we're just, people can speak to items. The idea is that you would only pull an item if you wanted to debate it, and so comments are allowed during this part because we're voting by consent on the package.
I'd like to have a conversation with Councillor Cameron and whether the decision by the higher level of government to not allow single-use occupants or single-use items, is that ever going to change in your?
I believe so.
Yeah.
The province is actually in response to a UBCM resolution last year where the municipalities collectively said, hey, province, please regulate single-use items provincially. Their response to the UBCM when that resolution was passed is saying, well, we're not going to do it provincially, but we're really happy that local governments, to see that local governments are taking action. So now the court said, well, you can't take action. So if they actually mean what they say, then they will give us the power, and I'm hoping our colleagues in the North Van District and City and Vancouver, Burnaby, Surrey, if in all their ministers' meetings they make the point that this has to change, that I'm hoping that that collective pressure will cause the province to give us the adequate jurisdiction. Yeah, I believe so. I'm not sure exactly all the jurisdictions, but.
Not at this point, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, no, sorry, it was one of the eastern provinces.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think Newfoundland.
Halifax. No,
city of the Towers.
Halifax is the city.
So, one of the eastern provinces had enabled municipalities. And at the moment, I just can't think of it, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'll call the question then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving to the reports, Mayor and Council. Councillor Soprovich?
Madam Mayor, do I get a red light?
Yes.
There we go. Thanks to you and some other friends, I'm on Regional Parks this year. And I must say, Friday, we're going to tour all the regional Lower Mainland parks. At our last meeting, it was very interesting. Once a year, they do have a number of organizations that help within the parks. The volunteer quota in the Lower Mainland that helps look after metro parks is phenomenal. If you transfer that into dollars, I'll tell you, it was just incredible. And the things they do, from getting together for weed pull or invasive species or helping wildlife, everything possible, even in areas of controlling people, because some of the parks are getting super well used. I've also, we're going to visit next week ACDI. We're going up to the Lynn Canyon Park. There's been so many visitors up there that they've had to make wooden walkways. So the folks in ACDI are coming up to critique it, and when they get a hold of it, of course, it better be in top shape before they give an okay to it. But it shows you how the popularity is growing in our regional recreational system. And here we have 2,600 hectares above us here, full of trails, and couldn't be a better form of healthy weekend jaunts than to walk the trails below the ski lift area, but certainly in our lands. And Baden-Powell Trail, and a lot of it connects you all the way right across to almost the Deep Cove and beyond the woodlands.
Great, excellent.
So
Thank you for serving on that committee.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Councillor Thompson?
I actually had a tremendous pleasure of attending the West Vancouver West Coast Modern Homes Tour this weekend. Have you guys all done that?
Every
You've
year,
got to.
pretty much.
Really? It's amazing. It's quite a bit of time. It's about 6 hours if you go to the reception, and I chose to go on the bus, and I completely lucked out with expert heritage advisors, Michael Geller, architects. I just sat quietly and followed them around the houses and listened to them talk about the concrete quality and the scale and everything. It was really entertaining. And then we wound up at the Eagle Harbour Yacht Club for delicious eats and drinks afterwards. So if you haven't gone, go. Excellent. Every year. And we saw houses. We started with Benetti's house and ended with a beautiful Fred Hollingsworth house up in Caulfield. It's just exquisite.
Great, thank you. So seeing no other speakers, I'll just briefly share the reason I couldn't go this year, and I think I've gone every year since I've been on council, is I was, as you know, at a conference, the Asian Pacific Cities Summit in Australia. I was requested by Metro, as you know, to attend because of my chairing the Indigenous Relations Committee and being a director, so I joined Mayor Buchanan there. The reason why it's so fundamental to Metro's international program is that there's actually a Mayor's Council of Southeast Queensland where 10 mayors actually have formed a federation similar to Metro, but it's mainly advocacy. So they're very interested and have developed this relationship. It is the largest, it is the premier summit in the region and attracts the largest number of city leaders. I have the data, but there were 93 mayors, 1,000 delegates. numerous cities represented, and the core themes, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight because I know everybody wants to go away, but I am going to prepare a report for staff and council because and there is a book I want to buy each of you. The themes were around innovation of cities, mobility of cities, livability of cities, and sustainability of cities. So you can imagine we had Mark Randolph, the founder of Netflix, as a plenary speaker, and a very interesting woman, I have to say, on the joint U.S.-China clean energy entity, and it actually gave me great hope around environmentalism. We always use China and say, oh, well, China, if they're not doing anything. Actually, there's a number of initiatives being done in China, which I will also share with you. And Councillor Gambioli, when I told her that, was not surprised. So I know that she follows this sort of stuff. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say, and I'm going to work on that and get it to you in the next couple weeks. So on that, I will ask that, well, we have the public question period. So we have a few speakers that are on this list. I have 3 speakers.
Madam Mayor, sorry, just the motion to accept the reports from Mayor and Council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Wong, I jumped the gun.
Oh, is it me? No, it is
Yeah,
not me.
you were doing the motion to receive the reports.
I will move to receive the reports then.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And public questions. And I have Mr. Lone. Is he still here? Mr. Lone, Kelly Lone? That's okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Lucinda Jones, and then Carol Ann Reynolds. Ms. Jones? Lucinda?
In a friendly manner, even though I haven't heard back from anyone, my 3 emails that I've sent out. I haven't heard from any one of the councillors or you, Marianne Booth. But maybe I should just make mention of that, because actually today I did speak briefly with Nora Gambioli in relation to why I hadn't heard back from my emails, and it is her understanding that we are involved in litigation, that we have a legal process still underway, which I wasn't aware of. Maybe as long as there's any work going on Lower 31st Street, there is still an injunction held against me. Maybe someone has some information that they could shine on that.
And you haven't heard from my assistant either?
No.
Ms. Henderson?
No.
Okay, that's surprising. And were the emails sent today, or were they?
No, they've been sent over the last 2.5 weeks.
That's surprising, because usually we do send out an acknowledgement, at least. I do apologize for that. I'm sorry. I thought I was away, but my assistant was monitoring my emails.
It even goes farther back to when I first requested that there could be a meeting. And that was sent out to each of the councillors as well as to yourself, Mayor.
And we met?
Yes, but I didn't hear from any of the councillors, which was very surprising to me.
All right. Well, thank you, and I will follow up on that with my
Like
emails.
one party guest responded, but not the other 6. Except, I must say, except for Councillor Soprovich. He was the only one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize for my part in that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty disrespectful. I don't know why people don't do that. So I'll just speak to the West Vancouver tree bylaw. So with not being able to utilize the information that had been garnered from the dedicated public citizens reporting group regarding the tree bylaw, and then the information from staff, is it not with most issues that information is gleaned from those different sources and then it comes into a common data kind of decision-making pool where then you are able as council and mayor to make decisions. Like that doesn't strike me as being unusual that you put out kind of the reel for information, and that is only part of the decision-making process. So I encourage, we rely in relation to trees to be considered as natural assets, and I'm glad to see there's further substantiation now with this report tonight. And so it's really important that this be adopted in a timely manner and we protect the trees as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Now that the reality of climate emergency has been accepted and declared, the expectation is that that shift towards greater honoring and retention of the natural ecological systems will be understood and acted upon on all decisions. And the LEDA, is it LEDA report?
Ms. Jones, I'm letting you continue on because I used up some of your time, but
Okay.
are you close to being done?
Well, just two things then. When that imaging or however that canopy is going to be assessed, it's going to be counting all the dead trees as well. And so whatever absolute kind of specific numbers that you're hoping for, it's going to be very off because it will count all the dead cedar trees, which I would say are accounting right now, depending on what geographic location, if you're including the lands which BPP still yet has to cut down, et cetera, whether that's 3% or 12% of the canopy, it is significant. So there's a big margin there that already you're going to have to allow for, which might actually make the cost of that report a little bit redundant, whereas maybe you could have two half-time arborists or whatever employed in this interim period while the bylaw is still being worked on. There could be, I don't see a lot of people have an objection to having a half-time job. And that financing, if you're looking for money, I don't see why that couldn't be considered. I guess that's it.
Okay, thank you so much for those comments. And Ms. Carol-Ann Reynolds.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for bringing up again about the 0.35 and removal. And many, as well as the trees, appreciate your efforts. I was glad also to hear with the Natural Capital Report about the importance of trees. And I would like to point a couple of things out that perhaps some didn't consider. They said that we couldn't do it because it was a meeting on July 22nd and that's ended. Well, just as last night was a meeting, there was a meeting held tonight to be able to continue things. So you can still bring that up on tonight or July 22nd and then have a very short meeting. That's often been done. So that still is a possibility to protect those trees until the report is in. And in my opinion, it is more important to have a bylaw rather than to finance enforcement and have that as a reason not to have a very good bylaw. You already know, because of staff circumstances, there are many bylaws I've been told have not been enforced. I'm not blaming anyone, but that does happen. I'm just pointing out that having the bylaw is more important. You can pull up, try to find maybe some people of the national capital thing who are doing all of this. That could be delayed a little bit to get some people doing some work. And not only that, I'm sure you'd have many, many volunteers who would help you with protecting trees. I mean, Block Watch, they're not policemen, but Block Watch help. You can have Tree Watch who can help. So again, I will say, a hydrology study, I will try to enforce or have you institute and have a hydrology study so that we can have the soil protected, sticking to the hillside instead of being eroded or causing floods. Our property has flooded a bit when there's been rain. And I've had calls from many residents west of us that that's also been something that they've complained about. and the loss of trees do it. So that's another plea for the trees. And you've probably heard me say that don't cut them down. The view is through the trees. You can limb them through the trees or framed by the trees. I'm stopping Councillor Cameron from reading his email. The other thing that can happen is the neighborhood groups, the neighborhood group study, really, really important. I have recommended for years that the neighborhoods get together and have their characteristics. That'll make it easier for you. I even tried the neighborhood, the ratepayer umbrella group. It'll be easier if the neighborhoods tell you what they want. That's why I advocated a map at the Heritage Fair, and I hope they will bring out maps so people can talk about their own neighborhoods and get what they want. I believe in diversity, but not eating away at different little neighborhoods. So I will stop with a maiku for the trees at the end.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Carol-Ann. She's going to stop with what? Sorry.
With a maiku.
A mic, oh, I thought you said through. Okay,
But the
sorry.
tall trees just stand there. No cry, no escape, and the chain saw gnaws.
Thank you, Carol-Ann, on that positive note. All right. Yep, could I get a motion to adjourn? Okay, Sharon.
I'd like to, I'll second.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thompson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.